Okay? Since this is a workshop, we'll dispense with the invocation and the pledges. We'll go straight to business. So I do declare this session in order right now. I'll make a few comments. Keep in mind that this is live streamed, so just keep in mind that on your language or dancing or whatever on the table or whatever it may be. Uh, Looks like we've got a lot of work ahead of us tonight. Dalton has been here now 3 years. He has done a phenomenal job with the city. He's done a lot of things. He's taken a lot of heat off our council when we needed it. So, thank you, sir. And done a very good job of that. Since he's been here 3 years, the council has not actually been here in session for 90 days yet. So what I recommend is, I know there's things you'd like to change or improve or whatever, but please take it slowly at first. These things can be changed over a period of time. They don't have to be changed at once. So keep in mind that things can not always what they seem. So let's look at it closely before you do a lot of changes on it or take your time doing it. We are a municipality. We are not in business for a profit. So keep in mind, sometimes things in a budget looks like they're expensive, but you have to look and see what services or goods they provide. People, the citizens of Morgan's Point, depend upon us to provide them goods and services: water, streets, police protection, fire protection, and parks. So keep in mind, some of these things are self-sustaining, some are not. So anyway, we need to. I'd like to see y'all give Dalton parameters to operate within, but I don't like to. Would not like to see y'all micromanage his day-to-day operations. Please stay out of that, because that will come back and bite us. So there are things that happen, and glitches that do pop up, and it's water bills, things like that. If y'all all heard and seen or whatever. So but he's always come through and taken care of it with Jesse and BJ and everything. So anyway, I will not be here till the end of the session. I will be out of town. If everything is not completed tonight and you don't agree upon a budget and a tax rate, Dalton said he would make arrangements that y'all can meet every day the rest of the week if y'all want to. So keep that in mind. Anyway, at that time, since I do not have a vote in this and neither does Dalton, I basically have said all that I can say, and Dalton and Kerry will be able to take care and answer questions you may have. They're more in tune with it. Dalton and I have visited extensively on the budget. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a starting point. So some of you may think it's got too much in some things, and some of you may think it's not enough in other things. So that's for y'all to determine. That's what you're here for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, it's all yours. Dalton, you've got it from here. Oh, excuse me, Donna. I didn't apologize, Donna. You got comment. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Good evening. First, I wanted to say, well, thank you all. Thank you all for all the hard work you've done on the budget. I have spent numerous hours on it myself. But I wanted to say it wasn't very user-friendly for the residents. There was supposed to be a copy in the city secretary's office, which there was, but we were told they would not make any hard copies for any residents. Also, there's nothing about salaries that we were able to look at as far as, individual salaries or any of that. That was not online for the residents. Also, there was a question that I presented to Kerry and Dalton. There was a $93,000 discrepancy in the general fund over what we budgeted in salaries, which when you budget salaries, that's hardcore. So I asked about it, and Kerry very graciously responded, and it was a error that they made, and he and Camille promptly corrected that error. And so it was in other places of your budget also, so it still may be in there, but they are working on correcting that. My concern was when I asked this question, a $93,000 question, Dalton said, you're no longer on the council, and with 5 new members and no experience, we have our hands full. So I said, well, I'll ask my questions at the workshop. And he said, yes, you can do that in your 3 minutes of fame. So just want to let you know how difficult this process was. And asking a simple question, that's the answer that a resident got. So I wanted to make y'all aware of that. I think that's important. One of the things that I wanted to point out is administration. I know y'all are biting a big bullet with the health care, and that's so wonderful that you're doing that for the employees and giving them the health care that they want. I'm not too sure you can add extra things like dependents and stuff at this time since you're chewing off such a large amount. Salaries, we took a big hit last year on the budget. We worked with all of our employees, got them up to the mid-range, and so this year that shouldn't be as difficult, and there shouldn't be as many hardcore raises that we gave last year. Also, I agree with the financial position. I agreed with the financial position when the city manager and staff wanted to bring on a marketing and communication person, and I asked at that time if we had a position open, could we not do financial position because of the financial straits that we were in with the lack of audits and the problems we were having with our financial. I was not supported by the staff on that, and the council voted 3-2. So it was pretty much a split vote. It wasn't unanimous to bring on communication person. But I do support a financial person. Wanted to let you know that. Also, the audits, we budgeted $110,000 in our audits last year, hoping that some of them would get done. It's projected out to spend $1 in audit in this calendar year, and it's only estimated $35,000 for your next budget. That will not take care of 2 audits. Also, the marina, there was $50,664 more in salaries in the marina. I don't know why. I know Ronnie. Ronnie, are you getting a $50,000 raise? Last year they wanted to give him 0, and I had to fight to get him some money. So I'd like for you to look at that. I know there's allocations, but we have to be careful what types of allocations. The marina is a small department and should have a small allocation of people from other departments. Also, I'll bring this up like I do every year. When we were told we needed to refloat the docks, the city got on it immediately, and every year we budgeted a refloating of the marina. When we had a problem with our finances, we had to freeze all projects, and so of course we froze that one. Once we got stable again, I brought it back to the table, said let's continue with this, and each year they have said no, we've got till 2028. My problem with that is every year we put it off, they cost us more and more money. What's it going to cost us if we wait till 2027 to do this? Just something for y'all to think about with that. Also, I support our emergency services tremendously. I'm sure our police and fire will tell you that. I support what they need in these departments, but I don't support putting on another administrative position. And that's what I look at this, another administrative position, and we have added several administrations in the last 2.5 years. Also, I wanted to tell y'all that, or remind y'all, we passed a resolution, 2023-06, on April 11th, and it was for library. They had a grant and to use for the arts. It's a very specific resolution, and I noticed that in the budget, the city manager noted that if the grant didn't come through with this $10,000, that the funds could be reallocated elsewhere. And I just wondered, where's the elsewhere? Is it going to be within the library, or is it throughout other departments? Because I think if you want the library to have an additional $10,000, let's budget them additional $10,000. They'll make good use of it, but be careful when you say it can be allocated elsewhere, because that's not specific enough. Also, I just wanted to ask a question, the Lee Klappas structure that's proposed. I think it's a great idea. Just make sure you have permission from the Corps and in writing. It was a booger to get Klappas Park done, and we ended up putting everything on city property and above the 642 because it was going to take us several more years to get that approved. So just wanted to kind of remind you about that. And so, and probably if there's anything else I want to address, I will address it during the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, Dalton, are you ready? It's your show.
Let me get organized real quick. How's everybody doing this evening?
Hot. Good.
All right. Yeah, this is the first year we've done the budget workshop in here, at least since I've been here. We were in the library before. So a little change of pace. I think this provides a lot more room. But definitely getting everything figured out. All right, so Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Welcome to our 2024 proposed budget workshop. It's a special session, but it's going to be kind of rolled into one. Let me find my agenda real quick and my slew of papers. Got an agenda with you? No, I don't want to take it out of your book.
I'll take it out of one.
Here, I'll just grab one over here real quick.
Okay.
All right, so really kind of a couple housekeeping things. Obviously, the goal of tonight is to go through the proposed budget. This is maybe the first time some of y'all have seen this. I know I've spoken with, I think, 3 council members and the mayor, of course, extensively, kind of on this over the last, few days. One of the things kind of important to note on this is we are ahead of schedule. Some of those nuances of being ahead of schedule is we are off by a couple of days as far as receiving some things from Belcad, which I'll go over. But again, it's not really going to impact it because this is, in a way, earlier as far as getting the budget in front of council. Workshop was about the same last year, the same timeline. We had a little bit more information, but we are also going right up to the last minute trying to provide some of that information as well. So outside of the presenting the budget presentation, there's going to be two things that are going to be important tonight. On the budget presentation, or the proposed budget presentation, you do not have to adopt it tonight, but an action has to be taken by law. So postponement, something. An action has to be taken. So it can be tabled, it can be postponed, it can be postponed to the 21st, it can be postponed to a later date at some point in time, but an action by city council, by state statute, has to be taken tonight. On the proposed tax rate, we are still waiting on, we have our preliminary estimates from Belcad. So all this budget is built around, and again, I'll go over that extensively in this. With the proposed tax rate, the proposed tax rate has to be basically approved. So it doesn't mean you can't change the tax rate, at a later date, but the proposed tax rate, at least presented to council, has to be presented, and a record vote has to be taken. The statutory requirements are really ill-defined as far as it really specifies. There is no statutory definition of what that means, but a record vote basically has to be taken. What that'll do is that'll get us ready for the notice in the paper. That's going to show our no new revenue, voter approval rate, de minimis rate, and everything else that's going to be needed for voting on the tax rate. So timeline, initially we had August 8th. We are going to recommend pushing that back. We have the deadline until the 21st of August. So that is the drop dead deadline that we have to have, or council should have the budget and everything passed. We're going to knock out the budget hearing tonight. We did something different this year, so please give us some feedback on this. What we had done historically is we would do the budget workshop, and then we would, at a council meeting or a special session, we would then do a public hearing on the budget, which sometimes was a month later. And then after that, the tax rate and everything else. So it seemed very strung out and drug out versus condensed when it's kind of fresh on everybody's mind. So we wanted to do the budget hearing after the workshop. One, because why do a budget hearing in the beginning when nobody's really heard the budget? And then two, it'll give everybody an opportunity based off of the presentation to make any public hearing comments. That'll fulfill the public hearing requirement for council.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
Just to get my timing straight. So this tax rate is going to be for what fiscal year?
Fiscal year 23-24, so this next fiscal year. So the tax rate is set in 2023 for the 2023-2024 fiscal year budget.
Okay, so when people get their tax statements in October, that's going to include the tax rate from last year. So this tax rate's going to show up in, okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'm confused. Yeah, I don't know quite how that works.
Yeah, so once everything is done, once everything gets approved and the process starts, in October, you're going to pay your taxes for 2023.
Based on this tax rate that
Based off of this tax rate or whatever tax rate council approves.
Okay, I just wanted the,
Yeah.
Simplistically, that would be a new
Correct. Yes, sir.
yeah, I just didn't know it could happen that fast.
It does. It's,
Okay, okay.
yeah, it's like clockwork. As soon as October hits, and so, diving in, won't go into too much detail, but the certified estimates have to come out by the 20th, or the certified values have to come out by the 25th of July. So that's kind of when the process starts, and the state dictates as far as, well, not necessarily the amount. Well, they do from the appraisal side, but as far as the timeline of everything, the state dictates stuff, then the appraisal districts kind of do their thing. But state law says the 25th of July, every municipality has to either have a certified estimate of their values, which may not be 100% complete, or a certified value, which is ideally 99, 100% complete.
And we have that.
And by law, we have the certified estimate. We spoke with Belcad and the appraisal district yesterday. We're anticipating what we call the truth in taxation sheet to be released on Thursday. So this is kind of where the timing of things, shifted a little bit. Last year, we had all of that before this. This year, we did a lot of, forecasting and took the calculators and kind of planned ahead with this. It doesn't change the core of the budget itself, and we'll kind of talk about that in detail as far as property taxes and revenue. All it does is it just provides, it'll provide the official certified detail of what your taxes are going to do. Your no new revenue tax rate, your voter approval tax rate, your M&O, INS tax rates, and all your and de minimis rate, which we'll probably painfully dive into some of that tonight. Any questions so far?
I have one question just on timing.
Yes.
You said tonight we have to either propose to meet again tomorrow night or do something, we have to make some action on this budget tonight.
And action has to be taken.
Then you mentioned August 21 as the deadline.
That is so what we did is we kind of pushed everything up. The goal initially, obviously, when we set the budget prior to May, we wanted to try to keep everything in line with just our regular council meetings. One, from the resident standpoint, it's planned, it's known, but so we try to keep everything in line with the regular council meetings. Knowing that we're not going to have probably the truth and taxation in time for the public, notice of publishing, we are probably going to recommend either a date next week or a future date, but the 21st is the deadline for approving the budget.
On this handbook for city council from TML that we got, it says the deadline is September 29th.
So,
Absolute drop dead deadline. So I just was curious.
yes, so the reason why there's two different ones is there's two different ways that you can adopt a tax rate. So in the tax rate, you have the voter approval rate, and then you have the no new revenue rate, and then you have the de minimis rate. In SB 2 in the 86 legislation, they came out with a 3.5% property tax cap that said you cannot go over 3.5% of the no new revenue tax rate, or what they used to call the effective tax rate. Excuse me. If a city goes over the voter approval rate, it automatically forces an election in those cities, which therefore they have to have it approved by August 21st, so they can call the election for November to get ready for the following year. So you're ultimately kind of creating two budgets if you go over the 3.5% tax rate. So the reason why we're kind of going in line with the no new revenue and the voter approval tax rate is, one, we are technically recommending going over the voter approval tax rate, but because we would fall under the de minimis rate, which is a whole another complex set of algorithms, then we would still in line with that, we would still align with over the voter approval rate. The September 21 is if you do not exceed the voter approval rate, then you can go until September 20th, because then there's no election that is being called. Yeah, so,
But I think the bottom line is we will approve the budget when we're comfortable with the budget, and we do need to deal with the tax rate. And we will have a budget going into next year, however long it takes, right?
yeah, worst comes to worst. I mean, hey, there's uncharted territories for everything, and, we can definitely keep the trend of unprecedented events. Worst comes to worst is the budget on the current year just gets installed again, and you operate as you operated in the years prior.
Until we adopt a new budget, yeah.
Speaking of the years prior, so one of the things, and you may get to this, you were talking about how this is the lowest tax rate.
Yes, I will talk about that.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll wait.
Yeah, no, I will talk about that. So I'm not going to ideally read this stuff verbatim. You obviously probably have read it already. So we'll kind of dive right into it. What I'll do is I'll kind of summarize stuff and we'll talk about some of the core things. Please, again, stop me in the middle of it so we can talk about it if y'all want to focus on one area more than another, and we'll kind of just move forward. Again, this is y'all's workshop, and said we'll kind of go from there. So the fiscal year 2024 budget process of this current year, the upcoming year that we're talking about now, currently in the fiscal 23 year, has been very similar to what we've done over the past 2.5 years. We really shifted the process over the past 2.5 years to, one, get directors a lot more involved in their own budgets, and really focus on trying to build a structurally balanced, or at least a mathematically balanced budget to accommodate all the needs of the residents, both the future and also the past. And so on this budget, it was really no different, other than the fact that we're obviously in some unprecedented times, not bad ones, just we have some new challenges that we're overcoming. And so there's a lot of stuff, and former council member Hartman had brought this up as well, that there's going to be some allocations in here that may not be defined. And so as you see some of these, there may be some things that are going to be earmarked. And the reason why we kind of earmark some of these is, one, we haven't talked about them yet. So we didn't know what y'all wanted yet, and we're 90 days in, so there's still a lot of things that are unfolding. As the CIP and fixed asset replacement, we'll call it the council workshop. Once that kind of happens, there's going to be some more opportunity to really define some of those, because even though the budget is done and potentially approved and completed, there's always opportunity for changes and improvements. We're always going to pivot. Even though we're not a business from a perspective of the private side and P&L and revenue or profits, we are a business in that we do have to pivot when things change and when the environment changes. So this process, really, we continue to do what we've done over the past couple years. We've been very successful with it, as far as not just going through the budget process, but each year we try to make some small improvements as far as the level of detail, the transparency we provide, not just to the residents, but also to city council. And while it's not perfect, you're right. We're far from user-friendly to our residents, and those are going to be some of the things that we will talk about in here to stay on the transparent forefront of this, to make sure that at any point in time, the information can be digested appropriately by the residents, who want to get involved with that. So we'll definitely talk about that some more. In the memo, I put some definitions and stuff in there. Again, we're always trying to add on to this. I think last year it was 10 pages. This year is roughly about 13, I think. And so we want to provide at least some relevant information that as we do this each year, y'all can kind of go back through, see definitions, because I definitely can go crazy on acronyms sometimes, so please stop me if I do. I will tonight at some point, I'm sure. But I tried to address a lot of those in the definitions. One of the things, kind of a noteworthy change, and I'm on page 4 if you're kind of following along. And again, please stop me if I overlook something or miss something. I'm on.
Your page 4 or our page 4?
I'm sorry. The little gray box on the bottom, it's going to be page 5. My apologies. So yeah, I'll try to stick with the packet pages for y'all. Excuse me. So some of the noteworthy changes for fiscal year 2024 was we further reallocated some more debt service, or what we call the interest and sinking, into the actual interest and sinking tax rate. Simply put, instead of us bringing it into maintenance and operations, which it was going into the general fund, which is a no-no, we moved 2 years ago, last year, we moved what was in the general fund out of the general fund into a debt service fund, which is a statutory requirement. And then we also started increasing our interest and sinking fund. So before, maintenance and operations think day to day. That's what salaries are paid for. That's what, the pool, everything's paid for outside of capital. When I first came on board, everything was out of the maintenance and operations fund. So the entire debt service was funded out of maintenance and operations, which is okay. You can do that. It's not illegal as long as it's tied into a separate debt service fund, but it's not going directly to the taxpayers separated out. So why is that important? It's important for a couple reasons. One, by having an interest and sinking fund, you're dedicating and restricting those funds, even though they're already restricted, you're dedicating that to the specific tax rate for the bonds or the debts that you're taking out for the city. In a way, we're debt poor, which is not a bad place to be, because we can, over time, 2025, 2026 ideally, start looking out to see what bonds you can go out for. And so we increase basically the maintenance and operations, or decrease the maintenance and operations tax, increase the interest and sinking tax. So it's going straight to, from your basically your tax roll into an interest and sinking fund going right to debt.
That was done in 22, 23.
That was it. So we started the process in 21, 20, yes.
So 22, 23.
22, 23, yes. So we started reversing everything our very first budget cycle, though. So we started actually applying some of the stuff into interest and sinking. And it was incremental because, one, when you're paying everything out of maintenance and operations, you're obviously going from at the time, it was a 59, 58 cent tax rate, fully in maintenance and operations covering debt, to a much lower one, 55 cents, I think 4 or 5 cents the first year, which now we're, I think, roughly about 9 cents. It's in your sheet, and we'll kind of go over that. The other reason why that's important, and I'll actually kind of talk about this since we ran some of the calculations on the no new revenue rate, the debt service rate funded in your tax rate does not impact, it positively impacts the amount of your voter approval rate. The more you levy in debt service tax, ultimately, the higher your voter approval rate is. So why is that important? Well, that's important because if you tie everything into maintenance and operations, and the state in their awesome algorithm thinks that, hey, everything is in maintenance and operations, and they want you to cut back on the day-to-day so you can fund larger projects, then your voter approval rate's going to take a hit. And this legislative session, fortunately, it didn't pass, but there was some bills that I'm sure we're going to see in the 89th legislation that ultimately wants to cap even small cities from using the de minimis rate and apply everything to that 3.5% cap, which that is going to be painful. Because
Go back in 25?
I'm sorry?
They go back in session in 25?
We're in 2023, 2025. So 89th legislation will be in 2025. So we'll start working with legislators on what that looks like, because that does impact small cities, which we'll talk about the de minimis rate and how that's kind of, why that's important. So let's see. So on this one, I kind of try to talk about some of the core components, especially with our directors. And of course, we love to have our directors here. One, they're instrumental in building this out. Two, the reason why we don't really have them brief their presentations, and every city does things different. I like it from a standpoint of, one, it lets us know as administration that, hey, the directors have buy-in in their budgets. They understand where their budgets are going, how they're getting there, why they're getting there. We're not feeding them with a silver spoon, so it's not top-down direction, it's bottom-up driven, and then we provide those resources and present them to council. The second component of that is, now I have to brief y'all. Do I understand the budget that I'm presenting to y'all and why we're presenting it? And so when we start sitting down with all the directors and understanding their needs and requirements, and then we can present that to council and go from there. We're constantly improving this process. You can ask the directors this or department heads this. When we first got on board, it was definitely not this way. There was a lot of information that was lacking, both from my standpoint, from their standpoint, just a lot of confusion overall that we've really spent a lot of time cleaning up, despite some many challenges, from prior administrations and councils. So on this one, last year, the big focus was finding balance and preparing for the future. That was a big component of last year, mainly because of a lot of the economic turmoil that was happening around the world. While it was not directly impacting us per se, it was indirectly impacting us. Just the cost of everything went up. Supply chain was causing issues. The water storage tank that we first went out for bid on came in at $5.4 million versus the initial engineering opinion of probable cost, which I'll say OPC or EOPC probably. But the OPC came in at about $2 million. And so nobody could have anticipated what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. We went back out for bid, and we fortunately got it for $3.6 million. And of course, that's the project itself. There's going to be generators and some other costs. So this year's workshop was trying to really focus on really three core things: infrastructure improvement, which I think is common across every city; employee benefits and really employee retention and sustainability, but also sustainability across the entire spectrum. One of the big challenges that we have that a lot of cities are not faced with in some regard, and I know Councilmember Bishop went to the TML, program, and so we got to really experience what it was like. That we're not different. A lot of cities are very similar in what we're doing. Where we are very unique is that a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with is making sure that we don't neglect the future while focusing on the past, but making sure that we don't drag our successes in the rear and then cause maintenance issues in the future. And so we're in this really, odd pivotal moment, and I think every year we're reassessing what that looks like to figure it out, because some don't like to hear it, and I've been read the Riot Act a few times on it, but the bottom line is we haven't been doing things right. We have not always been perfect. Now, nobody's perfect, but one of the biggest challenges that every council is going to face, and what we've been facing for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, is we have to start somewhere, and we got to play catch up. And so a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is, unfortunately, we're playing catch up on a lot of things. And so while numbers may be skewed and percentages may be skewed, and I'm going to try to always use percentages and numbers to provide clarification, but we're playing catch up, and that's the bottom line. And can't be any more simple than that. So going into the tax rate, Councilmember Bishop had brought that up, and I've talked to a couple of y'all about this. We ran a 20-year history on the tax rate, and I'm finding that.
Did you give us a copy of that?
The 20-year history, I don't know if that was one of them or not.
I didn't get it.
Okay, well, I can pass this one around, and y'all can look at it, or we can get copies. So my apologies for that.
Exactly what I was going to actually ask for, so.
Hey, I guess I can read minds now. Awesome. So Morgan's Point Resort in 2003, basically all the way to 2022, we averaged 63.80 cents of a tax rate with a median of 64.21 cents of a tax rate. So that's over the span of 20 years. The 58-cent tax rate that we,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
yeah, so
That's
from,
not on page 7, okay,
no, so this was data that I'll pass around. This is historical data.
okay.
So across Morgan's Point Resort, so in 2003 it was maybe I need to start needing glasses. 53 cent
Borrow
tax.
these.
Yeah, 53 cent tax rate. There were some that were 69 cent tax rate in 2005, but overall across the 20 years, the average was 63.8 cents per $100 of valuation, and the median was 64.21 cents per $100 of valuation.
Wow.
So at a 58-cent tax rate, it is the lowest tax rate. Now remember, residents get confused with this all the time. While the tax rate might have gone down, because appraisals are going up, you might still pay higher in property taxes. So a city might maintain the same property tax rate, but the revenues are increasing within the city. And so that does get confusing, and hopefully there's going to be some things we can work on each year to get better at talking about that. Taking the state statute stuff and making it more user-friendly. So this also goes into basically the Bell County tax rates overall. The median rate of Bell County cities roughly was between 60, 63 cents, 64 cents, 64 cents. One of the lowest one, I think, was in 2010, and that was with the city of Temple, was a 56.46 cent tax rate as a median. So I'm going to pass this around, but and we'll make sure y'all get copies of all of this.
For tomorrow.
But it just gets some good perspective on where the tax rate is and why it was done.
Yeah, because, and you've said this multiple times, because we're residential and don't have much commercial business, then our revenues are basically coming from property taxes.
Yes.
Periods.
And so,
If I'm taking water out.
well, so, yeah.
Arena out, but when you look at the general fund, the fire, police,
Right.
So,
it's all
yeah, so
coming
with
from
that,
property taxes.
some of the history over the past 2.5 years, and I commend council for making a really challenging decision, 2.5 years ago, was they actually increased the property tax rate to 61.92. That was the same year that the maintenance fees finally went away, and that was also the year that we started really rolling M&O into interest and sinking for the debt service. So it was kind of a multitude of things. And while we considered and we built the budget around maintaining that 61.92 cent tax rate, council was in a very tough predicament, and I believe that, I 100% believe they made the right call on it, was we didn't know the unprecedented times that they were facing with the economy, with everything going on, and because the tax rate was the way it was, they felt that any little bit of relief off of the taxpayers on the tax rate was going to be beneficial. And we'll talk about some of the challenges with having a high tax rate where there are revenues over expenditures, and kind of what are some of the things that we can do to overcome it. But the decision was made ultimately to build a budget around a 58-cent tax rate. And, and revenues were still, property tax revenues were still able to increase, and we were able to maintain that conservatively, balanced budget.
Okay, so I'm a numbers person, so if we went from 61.72 or 62 cents down to 58 cents, so that's a 4-cent decrease, but part of that is INS. How much of the 62 cents was M&O?
I'd have to look. Off the top of my head, I believe at the time the interest and sinking was roughly about 4 or 5 cents, but don't quote me on that.
Okay,
Because the interest and sinking account had always been in existence with the city. It did not go away until 2018, I believe. So there was about 2 years where it went literally from, there was some time, I think it was almost 11, 13 cents, and then it went from 11 or 13 or 9 or whatever it was down to 0, and everything was rolled into maintenance and operations.
okay, so I'm trying to get a feel for how much property tax decrease did we take when we took the rate from 62 cents down to 58 cents? How much of operational revenue did we lose?
So at that time, I believe 1 cent of levy tax was about $47,000, give or take.
So 4 cents would be about 200.
It was about $200,000 of the hit that the city took on that one. But there was also, during that time, there was an increase, I think, of about $250,000 to $300,000 in revenue because of the massive spike of appraised values.
Right, but we were kind of counting on that with all the new development.
I-
So we kind of gave it back. We gave 200 back, basically. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, that was a very difficult decision that council made.
I'm not questioning it, I just wanted
with
to
some
get
of those
that
yeah. So yes, and so some of the also the forethought that previous council really had on this, and I think some of the decisions was not operating in a vacuum. Some of the things that we had considered when we met with each council member on this and spoke extensively about some of, we'll call it the long range forecasting, some of the plans, some of the options, was we know that we're going to have some debt falling off in 2025. So if there was an opportunity to, and this was the mindset of council at the time, was if there was an opportunity to ease even just a little bit of burden off the taxpayers, once it came around to issue some debt, then they could go in and at that point, they can either through a general obligation bond, which goes to the voters, or a certificate of obligation, which council can do by ordinance, they can raise the taxes if they need to. Because at that point, there's something that's substantial that you can back as a council, whether that's a CIP plan, a fixed asset replacement plan, or other forms of planning that really show the residents. Because what you didn't want to have, which again at the time, roads is always a hot topic. Roads is a hot topic for every single council across every single city, across every single state, and y'all aren't going to change the book of history on it. So
What do we expect to?
yeah, and so with that though, when the tax rate got kind of lowered, if we didn't fill and plug the gaps of that additional 200,000, where it just showed revenues over expenses, and we're just dumping money into surplus, which we're going to talk about a little bit of that, year over year. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, and this was just a decision that council made when there really wasn't a plan in place to really tackle some of the core issues. It was hard to justify that at the time. And again, those were the conversations. The council had the authority to do that. The council ultimately, chose to go that route. We provided different models. I know some of y'all, I think this is probably y'all's first budget actually ever seen in the city of Morgan's Point Resort. And so, there are some very difficult decisions that happened, talking, to each council member on some of their wants and needs. And really the other side of it too, when you look at the capital outlay from last year, even, the city really still was able to accomplish a lot. Shade sale was a result of this, kid pool relining. There's a lot of little things that you're slowly starting to see that are coming to fruition that, yes, having the extra $200,000, of course, would be great. But at the time, they couldn't anticipate the future, and they made the decision. Correct.
It went down about 4 cents. Everybody went down.
Some were, yeah. Put it this way, large cities, unless they're shifting debt service into INS, so some will put it into M&O. Some of it's fluid. You have called combination tax revenue bonds. So you can move them pretty seamlessly in between M&O and INS. A lot of cities, the way that they're really capitalizing and maximizing their voter approval rate, where they don't have to go out for vote, because remember, they're capped at 3.5%. The only way you can shift that is by increasing your interest in sinking. And so if a large city is basically saying, hey, we're going to stay flat, they're shifting probably debt from maintenance and operations into INS, or they've taken on new debt, which at that point may keep their tax rate flat, but they're able to take on more debt. So all of this is a balancing act as far as what future debt do we want to take for what capital projects in the future that we're going to take, spread out over, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, and how do we make sure that we have the funding to do it? And while sometimes it is great to bank it, one of the other decisive points that council made last year on it was our cash reserves, from what we have in the bank to what we've been diligently working on. They were at least confident saying, hey, look, we got to do something because we are uncertain about the times that are ahead of us, at least at that point. And then, again, at any point, council can shift. Obviously, you can't raise the tax rate in the middle of the year, but you can start, again, planning for the future on that. Any questions on that? So another big talking point for this one, which I say it's a big talking point, but it's really not. Capital improvement projects, we kicked that one off last year, so of course we're going to still see it this year. While that is, I'm going to still say a placeholder fund, because until y'all actually approve and adopt a capital improvement project plan, which we're anticipating, we got to start setting some dates for November, then we can start working towards getting that developed with our engineers. And then the other one that's kind of new this year, which y'all are going to kind of see a placeholder on there as well, is going to be the fixed asset replacement fund. We kind of we'll talk about that a little more in detail, but again, bringing that up. Of course, focusing on continuous improvement, not just with current projects, but past projects, making sure that we maintain and sustain them. Just like a study that we don't want to leave on the shelf and collect dust, we want to make sure that a project that we implement isn't just, going by the wayside and falling apart, and we're neglecting those things. And also, we got to make sure that we're focusing on, future implementations of ongoing projects and what that looks like. We'll kind of talk about some of that, but really even simple outsourcing or implementation of different software, you're looking at sometimes a year to a year and a half of migration and implementation, and then training, and then the public comment, and then everything else, and then the dust settles, and then we move forward. But there's always a time period. Things definitely in government don't happen overnight as much as we sometimes wish they would. And then, of course, determine the capital projects needed for the future, which we'll work on. So on the, I do want to clarify some of this next part on the 2023 strategic goals and the 2024 preliminary goals. Let me start off. I'm sorry. Page 6. So let me caveat this by saying we are not saying that the column on the right is replacing the column on the left. We are merely just showing that the previous year's column, that's what the previous council had done during their workshop. And the 2024 preliminary goals, we didn't want to change anything just because council hadn't really talked about them at the time in depth. But those on there, financial integrity, staffing, infrastructure, green space and environment, bedroom community, public trust and transparency, communication, and safety, those were some of the key talking points that y'all talked about at the preliminary strategic
And if I
plan.
can clarify, and it's totally semantics, but we had 45 minutes and we came up with priorities. So these are not, the council has not come up with any goals yet.
No, I wanted,
So it said goals, I just wanted to clarify.
I wanted to put it in there. I didn't want y'all to think that I had neglected y'all and not done, put the information and the hard work that y'all talked about. So goals, objectives, priorities, again, insert adjective there. But yes, I wanted to make sure that verbatim we put what y'all put onto the flip charts, so there was no question, confusion. And I will caveat a caveat. It was financial integrity and audit, so that was a piece that I missed on there. But yes, we wanted to at least highlight that. So page 7. Again, I put the future date, statutory requirement. We can set a future date at a minimum. We can go ahead and do a special session on the 21st as kind of that last ditch one. Or again, I'm going to take counsel from y'all as far as what y'all want to do and how y'all want to do that. But we could talk about that. Okay, so we can talk about what that looks like and go from there. We got time.
Or maybe we can do it before that, before we leave.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The 21st is merely just the statutory deadline to do the budget. So we kind of talked about this already. We are proposing a 58 cents per $100 ad valorem tax levy for FY 2024. This tax rate is unchanged from the prior year. I ran some brief numbers using a little bit of 2022 data because we don't have our truth in taxation sheet. So I was doing a bunch of number crunching and stuff and staring at the screen. And right now we're estimating our no new revenue tax rate to be 51.36, our voter approval rate to be 52.94, and our de minimis rate 60.81. Now again, those are not going to be set in stone. I will not have the accurate information on those until the truth and taxation sheet comes out. The reason why I wanted to run those calculations on there was to, one, use it as an awesome discussion point of what this means. And we're going to fry your brains for about 5 minutes on this. And also to show that the 58-cent tax rate that we're proposing does fall in line with the de minimis rate. So, no new revenue tax. Yes, sir.
I must have been sleeping. Would you go back 1 second and explain to me that you've got the tax rate and then the voter approval rate? Can you define what that means?
The voter
They
approval
love
rate?
the thing, or that they?
So the no new revenue tax rate is the tax rate that would generate the exact same amount of revenue from the prior year less new development or new value. So new tax rate, take the new value out, that tax rate would generate the exact same amount of revenue as last year, this year at a 51.36 cent tax rate. The voter approval rate is simply you take the no new revenue tax rate and you multiply it by 1.035 or 3.5%, because that's the statutory cap that they put on cities. As soon as you go over that 3.5%, then you trigger an automatic election, unlike before, which was an 8%, and the only time it would do it would be, through petitions or other options.
So
So-
could you roughly tell me what that 3.5% would be?
52.94. So it's roughly about 1.6 cents, give or take.
So if I'm reading this right, the fiscal to 2023 for operations for police and fire is 50 cents, 0.75 in 2023. In 2024, we're going down to 49 cents. So that's less money available for operations.
Correct.
And about how much is that?
So 1 cent of levied tax is about $53,000.
So that's 75 then, because it's 1.5.
It's 1.5, yeah.
Okay,
So
so it's another decrease of about $75,000 that we have available for operations.
for operations, correct.
Is that true?
It's,
Because is it not based upon the value of the property?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Correct.
so when you say we're losing money, that's probably not true.
We're losing money on the rate. We're not losing money. The appraised value is totally outside our control.
so
Yes,
the
yes,
rate,
yes,
so the
but
rate is going
the way
down.
I'm hearing you
Tax
say,
rate may go up. I mean, your tax dollar may go up because your value has gone up.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though your rate has gone down.
Yes,
But I'm
absolutely.
looking at it not from a resident standpoint on this particular thing. I'm looking at it from the city's point of
I was
view.
just hearing you say we're losing money, and I don't think that's a true statement.
Based on this rate,
For my simple little brain.
well, I don't know if I can explain it, Carrie, but
So-
based on this rate is going down for maintenance and operations, which is the amount of money we have available to run fire and police and admin and the city, other than water and marina. So since that rate's going down, if your appraisal rate was flat, which it's not, But if it was, the city is losing
Yes, yes,
based on
yes,
that
but
rate.
In the real world, it doesn't matter because it's going to go up.
I know when I look at pricing and I look at revenues, I look at volumes and I look at rates. So one is a volume and one is a rate. So all I'm commenting on is the rate, not
Okay,
the
but
volume.
I'm not trying to be argumentative.
No,
it's
that's
just-
okay.
What I'm
I'm just
hearing
looking
you,
at it differently.
what I'm hearing you say is, but because we went from 50 to 49, we're going to lose money to operate. We don't have as much money to do M&O, and that's not true.
We
Because
have
of the I mean,
$75,000
look at how much
less than if
inflation,
we would have held it flat.
but we're not.
We're not holding it flat, correct, we're going down.
No,
So here, let me try to clarify this real quick.
It's just,
So going back to the 58-cent tax rate, tax rate, the lowest in 20 years, even though we have the lowest tax rate, we are still increasing money because appraisals are going up. So from
that's my point.
So from the standpoint of, is the M&O tax rate going down? Correct. But we are not losing money in the standpoint because appraisals are going up. Now, let me throw another caveat in here because this is important. If the state imposes the 3.5% cap, whether the maintenance and operations tax rate goes down or not, if they put that 3.5% cap on this year to trigger an election, we'd be going down to a 52.94 tax rate this year. We'd be cutting our tax rate by 6 cents.
Okay.
So where you lessen the impact on that is by increasing the interest in sinking. So by us pulling about 1.5 cents or so, or whatever this, by us lowering the maintenance and operations and increasing the interest in sinking, you're actually increasing your capacity not just for debt, but you're also increasing your capacity for not triggering a voter approval rate as quickly. Now, the analysis on this and what this is telling me, because now we're going to go into the de minimis rate. So this is awesome. So the de minimis rate is you take another $500,000 and you divide that out by the, I believe it's the taxable value, don't quote me on that, but you divide that out, and the tax rate that you get out of the de minimis rate, you can then add to your voter approval maintenance and operations tax rate, your debt service tax rate, or your interest in sinking, and then you add the de minimis rate to that, which comes out to 60 cents. And again, the numbers aren't going to be solid. They're probably going to change by Thursday, but this just gives you some context. 60 cents.
Not an additional 60 cents. It'll raise it
It'll
up too.
raise the limit to 60 cents. So if you fall under the de minimis rate, which is there are specific requirements for cities, 30,000 population and some other stuff, basically the city can go up to the de minimis rate before it triggers an automatic election. So technically speaking, council could go up to a 60.6081 cent tax rate this year without triggering an election. Now, it could trigger a petition should somebody petition,
Right.
but it would not trigger an election. So why is this
it would
important?
require an election.
It would,
It would
yeah,
be required
it
for
would
us to have an election.
100% would be over the de minimis rate. If the state takes away the de minimis rate, then anything over the voter approval rate of 52.94 will be automatically trigger an election, which means you're basically strong arming smaller cities, which is some of the big challenges with that. So assuming that the de minimis rate, well, the de minimis rate's going to stay next year because they only in session every 2 years. Right now, my anticipation with new development coming in, we have about 100 homes that are, slated to be developed over the next probably 3 to 5 years. And those are going to be starting at probably $500,000 going up to $1.5 million. So what does that mean? It means our de minimis rate capacity is quickly decreasing. To put that into perspective, last year our de minimis rate was 67 cents, and it's at 60 cents this year with an increase in interest in sinking. So we are now compressing our voter approval rate and our de minimis rate, which means that, let's say next year, or let's say some things even change, this year is unlikely, but let's say that the de minimis rate was 57 cents. You would be going down to 57 cents on the de minimis rate. So unless you wanted to trigger an election. So just kind of food for thought, that's going to be something that we're going to be looking for over the next year. And again, we're not going to anticipate appraisals going as high. There was a school, a homestead, and exemption stuff, but that's going to impact schools, not us. Regardless, though, Some people are going to start seeing at least a little bit of improvement in their pocketbooks because of that. That being said, we don't know what their appraisals are going to do. Assuming a 5 or 10% increase, again, we just don't know. That's conservatively low, but 10% is the homestead exemption cap. Then that de minimis rate with new value could easily force a lower tax rate. So whether it was maintaining a 61.92 tax rate for an additional year, eventually it would have gone from 61.92 to potentially to 52 cents, literally overnight. So these are some of the things that we're paying attention to. Again, the more debt you have, which again, you got to have reasonable debt, but the more debt you have, long-term notes, basically the state's saying we're not going to hold that against you because you're ideally funding larger projects that are restricted to the interest and sinking tax levy. Clear as mud?
Dorothy, the only thing I was trying to, just if people are not, if they're listening to this, I understand perfectly your point, but my point is to me, as, Joe Schmo that's not into this stuff up to my eyeballs, even though the rate goes down, the amount of money does not necessarily decline, because as anybody that's paid 2 cents or 2 seconds of attention to what happened to home prices, it went from ridiculous to, oh my God. So my favorite war story about this is, not long after I got here, I was down at the tax office, and the lady was telling me a little story, and maybe it'll clear up where I'm from. The lady had just some woman had just bought a new house and was down there complaining vociferously. Is that a nice way to say that? That her taxes were too high. And she tried to explain to her that it's 100, in the state of Texas, if I'm not mistaken, it's 100% of market value. Yes?
Assessed value, I don't know where they get
Okay, well,
assessed values.
I think it says market value.
Okay,
So the lady said, okay, would you sell your house for that appraisal value? She said, hell no, it's worth a lot more than that. That's kind of the point. If the rate goes down, but the house value goes up, you're getting more money simply because of the inflation. That, when you say you're losing $200,000 worth of money, I don't.
I just did a real quick analysis, and based on the financial statements, year over year, we were down $65,000 in M&O from 22 to 23. But I don't want to get into that right now.
Right. I
But it
was
is a
trying to
piece of
clarify
cash
that.
available
Yeah,
to
okay.
spend money. Okay.
Yeah, and
But the amount of money that you had in your checking account was, in the city's
Well,
checking
and-
account was still high.
And the
Potential money is the
Yeah.
thing.
well, and
Lost opportunity, in my opinion.
Lost opportunity.
and the other side of the
Okay,
maintenance
it's
and
done. It's-
operations.
I'm not changing it.
And the other side of the maintenance and operations too, and this is where it's kind of a good talking point for residents, is by lowering the maintenance and operations, in a way, you're kind of showing that you're trying to be the best stewards of the taxpayer dollars, because we're trying to limit as much as we can reasonably under the maintenance and operations versus, some of that conspiracy stuff or some of the things that happen in other cities where which in a way is kind of what drove the Senate Bill 2 requirement of 3.5%. It created other issues, and that was the driving factor behind that is if cities have the opportunity to lower the tax rate, but they're not, then what is it going to? And so in a way, even though this is kind of, not, non-substantive, it shows that at least city council and city manager and the team are really trying to say, look, we're trying to offset as much as we can out of maintenance and operations, even though it's not a lot. We're trying to operate within that budget, and we're trying to make sure that we be very fiscally conservative with it. We are good stewards of the maintenance and operations, and the operational tax stuff, and we're not just willy-nilly throwing everything into maintenance and operations, just arbitrarily. And so I think that's the important highlight of the tax rate, because think about this. On a 69-cent tax rate in 2005, you guys probably had a fraction of the amount of income. So again, looking at just the tax rate the state wants you to look at, because it is the no new revenue rate is the state's way of basically saying, hey, if your tax bill is high, go talk to your local officials and let them deal with it, and then the state can take a step back. So really just some clarifying points on the notice of public hearing on the budget. Obviously that went out. The hard copy that is provided in the city secretary's office, If y'all want us to be able to print as many budgets as y'all possibly want for our residents, you give me the go-ahead and we will kill every tree in America to make that happen. You just tell me.
I think the last 100 pages probably don't need to be printed. But I would say your executive summary is awesome.
Well, and so, I'm perfectly good with that, so we can maybe talk about what that looks like,
I would
but,
just do it if requested. I wouldn't print
Oh,
up
yeah.
30 copies just in case.
well, no, I'm, yeah,
No, I think this is part of public information, don't you think?
oh, it is.
But even with a PIA, you have to pay for it.
Yeah,
Oh, you do?
oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there's reasonable fees set for the PIAs, but either way, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Again, it's one of those things where how much do we want to dive into? You know, if somebody's requesting the 100-page sheet, are we going to restrict it? And so that's kind of where I want to put that on council. Again, food for thought, nothing to make a decision on now, but just to address some of our residents' concerns.
I was going to say, all this, even
Yeah.
the 100 pages.
And we have libraries in the public, you know, libraries in the computers. We have computers in the library. So again, and we'll talk about some of the technology side of stuff and what that can look like. Because again, we're trying to make this as end user friendly as possible. So we'll discuss some more of that. So on the notice of public hearing, the numbers that we did on here are based off of preliminary values. So each week, pretty much starting in beginning of April, May sometime, we start getting preliminary values of what is our taxable value, and then what is the protest value. And so whenever this notice of public hearing on the budget, because we have the statutory requirements of making sure that it's in the paper at a certain amount of time before the public hearing, and again, we tried something new on this one. So this one was based off of the preliminary values that we had at that time. And that's okay for the notice on this public hearing. The next one for the tax rate, that's going to be the more detailed one based off of the truth in taxation. And those are where you're going to see the no new revenue rate, the voter approval rate, and de minimis rate.
And that's expected this week.
That's expected Thursday or Friday, we're hoping. And despite what some say about Bellcat, I'll tell you this, coming from other counties, they do a really good job at providing communities and cities their information in a timely manner. And they really do stay up on it. I mean, there was a lot of forms over the years. Like when I first came on board, I mean, in a way, they were holding our hands because there were so many things that we were missing year over year that was either late, non-existent, didn't happen, just a whole slew of things. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, those numbers may fluctuate a little bit based off of values. Again, doesn't impact the point of the budget. All right, so any questions this far? Any potty breaks needed? We're about to dive into kind of the core of this workshop. So actually, let's do this, if y'all want, Mayor. With the proposed tax rate, if we want to go ahead and do the record vote, we can knock that out, get that done, and then that way that's behind us and we don't forget about it later as our brains start getting fried.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
58 cents per $100.
Do we have any discretion at all in the split between INS and M&O, or is that strictly contractual based on debt amortization?
So there is some discretion, and this is where the state really, the relationship between the state and the appraisal district side, the timeline is off. So there is some discretion on it where we can tie it in, but when we ran the rough numbers by tying, so last year I think we had about 330,000 going to INS levy, and then 150-ish thousand coming out of maintenance and operations. We got to run the numbers again, and we can look at it. We may have a little bit of discretion on it. Again, just because you set the proposed tax
Give us
rate now,
more money for operation.
well, just because you set the tax rate now doesn't mean you can't change it later. So this is not setting the tax rate for the entire. This is setting the proposed tax rate because by law I have to present it to
Get out of the
council.
way.
Yeah, so y'all have the opportunity to change it, and when we have more solid numbers, we can do it because.
Well, I'd like you to advise us on that.
Okay, absolutely. No, and that's one thing that I wish we would have had before, but again, doesn't change the core of the budget, but from the tax rate, you know, we are proposing that. We can change it at a later date as we get some more information and details. Based off of some rough numbers, if we pull 150,000 out and tie it into maintenance and operations from the INS, we are going to be very close potentially to hitting that de minimis rate. So we may have to lower taxes a little bit depending on doing that. So it could be counterproductive.
That's my question.
Oh, yeah,
We cannot change that.
to increase.
No, if I wanted to keep
Take
it
away.
at
We can
58
take away because
cents,
it's our debt obligation.
I wanted to reallocate.
So
if it's an obligation, then of course.
So
Okay.
to clarify, you cannot increase your interest and sinking beyond your debt obligation, but you can increase your maintenance and operations however you want to do it.
But if I wanted to keep at the 58-cent rate, then our debt obligations say that this has to be the split. That was my fundamental question.
No. So the debt can be split between combination tax and revenue. So we can pull INS, like we can go from, the 0.89 cents, we can go back to the 0.725 cents in interest. We can't go higher than the 0.8. But remember, and again, we'll have more solid numbers to advise council on. If we go down to the 0.07 or 7-cent interest and sinking rate, that could trigger us actually having to lower the tax rate because, again, maintenance and operations increased, which could be counterproductive to maintaining the 58-cent tax rate. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So, and really from the advice side, and again, I'm not advising this right now. Once we get some more information, we could. I would almost go the opposite direction, knowing how much of a compression there is on the de minimis rate. Council could really strongly consider actually increasing it up to the de minimis rate this year, especially with the school taxes, coming down. They're going to feel less of that issue because this might be the last year that we either could go up to the de minimis rate or not. We just don't know yet. So this might actually, and when I ran these numbers today, this was not even a thought in my mind, but this may be the year because we went from 67 de minimis down to 60 because of appraised values and new value. We had 15 million in new value this year, 8 million last year. And we're going to probably, and that was, again, some of the forethought that, the previous council had, and again, commend them for it, going up in tax rate, at that time, again, was to kind of prepare for that future. And so, again, once we get some more solid information on it, we'll definitely advise council on what that looks like. No matter what, again, until we look at the numbers, our recommendation as of today is not going to be to lower the interest in sinking because that could not trigger anything, but that could cause an issue with the de minimis rate. So until we get the numbers and advise, this may actually be the year we actually do the opposite and increase the maintenance and operation pretty much, I'm going to say one last time outside of, the de minimis side, but we'll talk about that as we start getting some more data.
Okay, let's go ahead and get this behind us then.
Yep.
Do I hear a motion to accept the 23-24 tax rate at 58 cents per 100 valuation?
I have a question for clarification. Do we have to vote the maintenance and operation and the interest in sinking at the same time?
You will when we ratify the vote on the actual tax. Tonight it is just the proposed tax rate.
Just a tax rate.
Yeah, once we go to the official vote, the official tax rate, you will have to do two separate record votes to ratify the tax rate, one for M&O, one for INS.
I'm looking for a motion.
Make the motion that
23-24 tax.
Proposed tax rate.
Is there a second?
I second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Moving right along, Dalton.
All right. So, general fund. So, real quick, any questions kind of on the difference between the general fund and the enterprise funds? Simply put, general fund is through property taxes and other things. Enterprise funds are businesses. They are revenue drawing, their services provided, or products offered. General fund in cities is mostly from sales tax and from property tax. Our property tax obviously is the majority of what our revenues come into the city. And it's also where, public safety is typically housed. And so really the highlight on the general fund, and again, we're going to dive into each department within the general fund, so I'm just going to skim over just the top high-level general fund piece. This year, 1 cent of levy tax generates $53,000 plus or minus, small margin of error. So what does that mean? Why do we put that in there? There's 3 questions that I always ask anytime I'm coming into a city or consulting or talking about it. Is what does 1 cent of levy tax bring? What is our rainy day fund or our reserve fund? And what is our daily operating expenditures? When I first came on board, I didn't have any 3 of those. Now, the 1 cent of levy tax, that's easy. I can calculate that. But ultimately, those were really not ready. Even the operating expenses, the daily operating expenses, we still don't have it down to the wire yet. We're making improvements on it. The 10,000 is a conservative. And really what that kind of boils down to is if we had some crazy catastrophe and we had to shut down services, trim the budget, remove all non-essential stuff, then what is it going to cost the city every day to survive? And so just off of salaries alone, salaries and compensation. So when I talk salaries and compensation tonight, it's going to be all inclusive. It's going to be full-time, part-time, and we can dive into some of the details on it, but it's going to be hourly, part-time, seasonal, the whole shebang. Excuse me. And so that's about $8,300 a day for salaries and everything all in. So again, that's trimming everything. Again, that's an area that we definitely got to get better on, and we're slowly making improvements on that. The 1 cent of levy tax, actually, let me back up. So let me turn you on to one of the handouts that you have, and you have your cash balances year over year. I was going to say it's the yellow tab one, but that's my notes. Do what? Yeah, it's a handout, sorry. It's a handout. And some of the handouts had to be updated at the last minute just because we were still in July.
Is it this one or this one?
That one.
Cash
Cash balance year over year.
Yep, cash balances year over year. And so a couple things that I want to highlight on this one, is really, and Carrie can go into detail more on it. We're going to, obviously, we'll stay at the high level on this, but one of the big things that we wanted to talk about on this was Carrie generated this a couple years ago, continuously making improvements. And a great point of the audits on there is the audits, we restricted those funds within these. So in a way, we're using this sheet to, highlight to council based off of numbers that tie to our cash balances in the bank, to our sweep accounts, pool accounts, to the budgets, to projects, and then anything that we feel council, or whether it's statutory or just council says, let's restrict it, we can go in and restrict these funds. And so when council approved the $110,000 for the audits, we kept the audits flat every year because that's what we had done, whether we had used them or not. So we pay for an audit every year. Well, we budgeted for an audit every year. And we restricted the $110,000 in the fund balance because when we did have it that year, if we don't use it, it ultimately falls into the fund balance or to the cash reserves. It shows as kind of a surplus. And so when we restrict that in there, it now takes away from our unrestricted cash balance. So again, restricted cash balance is things that are tied up, whether that's statutorily or because council wants to. And then your unrestricted cash is, we'll call it the rainy day fund. Based off of these numbers, and again, I put about 346, lost my days, about 346 days at $10,000 a day. That's going to obviously fluctuate, but again, that's not factoring in your annual budget. So if you go down about 3/4 of the way, you'll see difference, and then you'll see projected revenues over budgeted revenues, and projected expenses less CIP under budgeted expenses. Everybody see that? Sweet. So what this very simplistically kind of shows is really each year. Yes, no, thank you for that one. So if you get the budget, adopted budget proof one out as well, this will kind of, we could show kind of the comparison of this. But while you're looking for that, the projected revenues over budgeted revenues, that's our conservative projection of saying that we're going to have $161,000 revenues over, not revenues over, revenues over budgeted revenues. The other column, the 475,000, is what we projected from budgeted expenses and that we're under those budgeted expenses. So in a way, we didn't spend $475,000, whether we budgeted conservatively, project shifted, priorities shifted, whatever. But it also shows on the 161,000 revenue increase in revenues, it shows that we budget conservatively low for our revenues, typically at 98.5% of, we're just going to say property taxes, but we always try to budget low on revenues and high on expenses. And that kind of column there shows that difference for this year. On the adopted budget proof, if you go down to, you can look at the 21-22 actuals and the 2020-2021 actuals. It shows that we were $1.4 million over in fiscal year 21 and $1.07 million over in 2022. Now, both of those years had ARPA funds, correct, Carrie? So that was about $500,000. So if you pulled $500,000 out of that revenue over expense, that's roughly how much went from the city coffers, the entire fund balance, the entire budget into fund balance. So outside of even ARPA, which was a little over $1 million, each year, or over the last 2 years, there was about $1 million put into fund balance. So when you look at the year-to-date actuals,
Sorry, and that grant money was unrestricted, we could do
It's-
whatever we wanted with it?
it's relatively unrestricted, yes.
Okay.
So
That just went to part of operations.
It
Where
it
did
is
it go?
restricted. It's not tied into unrestricted cash. It is tied into restricted cash.
Okay. Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, that answer your question? So really we just wanted to again kind of show that our methodologies in the budgeting process and what we presented to council over the 2.5 years, and even kind of before, because obviously I came in the middle of 2021, but it was it was really through the due diligence of working with the directors, really taking hold of their budgets at the time. We really started trimming some things out almost immediately, figuring out where some of the fluff was within the annual budget. And so to kind of Carrie's point on this, when you look at the year-to-date actuals or even the projected year-end, it's showing that we're 1.9 million expenses over, revenues. If you take out the project, which again is funded through restricted funds, if you subtract that out from the CIP side, then it'll show a net positive or revenue over expenses projections. Any questions on that one? So now we're going to start diving into some more of the meat.
Real quick,
Yes, sir.
so 346 days of cash reserves, what is, I've read everything from you just need a day to you need 148 millennia put back. So what is the generally accepted target for a municipality?
Really, that is up to council. On average, cities, depending on, again, their cash disposition, what they want to do, projects, it could be anywhere from 90 days, which I would say is the bare minimum, up to a year. So there's a couple great things.
In a year.
Yeah, our cities
Always-
typically had a
always
year.
like a year.
Me too.
Now,
We stayed pretty.
Now, that being said, and this is kind of just the frank, ugly, honest truth on it. When you're wanting to do projects, the money's got to come from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
the caveat to that, though, and I think this is where we're in such a great position, as a city, is that cash reserve of, let's just say $3.5 million for sake of numbers. That $3.5 million, when we go through CIP planning, through fixed asset replacement planning, that money can ideally be restricted and earmarked to capital improvement projects, to fixed asset replacement funding. So for just a scenario, if we say, hey, we're going to do $500,000 of projects, but we're going to pull $100,000 out of cash capital, so out of the regular budget year, and $400,000 out of CIP, and then you find ways to fund the CIP through transfers, which we'll talk about transfers here in a minute, you can then continuously fund the fixed asset replacement fund, fund the CIP, and then again, as we get the financial advisors involved and we start looking at issuing debt, you can then start tracking, we're going to pull funds out of cash capital each year, we're going to pull funds out of the CIP fund this year, and we're going to pull funds from the bond series, however we decide to do that in the future. So lots of different opportunities, and all that stuff ultimately becomes more transparent, one for y'all, because it really provides us a roadmap of where we're going and how we're going to get there. So one of the other challenges that we've had through every department, through obviously just the accounting side, the finances, it seems like sometimes it's just a black hole and it never ends. So sometimes I'm like, will it ever end? But we are making a lot of progress. And the goal that we ultimately set, or that I set when I first came on board, was I want to see 10% increase or decrease, basically by line item, and simplify it. Because ideally on a zero-based budget, I kind of say it's a hybrid, but we obviously have some starting points. We're not going to go start over zero on office pens and supplies or certain items. But we ultimately, every year, we're going to reassess core funds and what's going on. Expenses, revenues, everything. We're starting over pretty much every single year. We don't accrue it each year. We do kind of behind the scenes as far as restricted funding, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, we do zero-based budgeting. So one of the challenges that we've had is there was a lot of things that we had to, I'm not going to say reallocate, but realign. There was line item funds, there was line item accounts, there was certain things both in revenues and expenses that were either very misleading, just were flat wrong, not necessarily wrong from a financial perspective, but just it either needed to be done through journal entries or through other accounting stuff that all the gurus deal with. So there was a lot of things that we kind of cleaned up. We'll talk about salaries and splits here in a minute, but at a point, there was splits that were like 7.5% and 8% and 11%, and we could never track it. And oh, by the way, the salary was split, but the health insurance and the benefits weren't split appropriately. So then you had this giant wonky thing, in there. Yeah, so it was more confusing than it was now, even at a $93,000, clerical thing that we had to work through. And that was really an encode thing that we had to press a button on or something. Science. So under the general fund, looking at the revenues going up about 10.42%. Again, that's about 312,000 increase. Now, whenever we did this memo, some of these were on kind of the back end of the preliminary values, right on the certified values. So again, comparing the information to here to your adopted budget proof, and again, there's going to be some tweaks by the time we hit the final budget. So when we start looking at $5,000, $10,000 here, yes, they add up, but looking at the big picture of everything, let's just try to stay there because there are going to be some tweaks along the way. I'm not going to say semantics, but there are going to be some non-substantive, some tweaks that we're going to have to do. So again,
If you'll just point that out as we go, that'd be great.
absolutely, and there's going to be some that Carrie will probably throw some at me too.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought, sorry.
Revenues and expenditures.
Oh, yep. So again, talked about the INS, put this in kind of two different places. Don't know why I did that. I guess it felt good at the time, but maybe because I had tax rate in the other one, but you get to see it again. And again, we talked about the importance of the INS and the tax rate and how that impacts your maintenance and operations or your no new revenue tax rate, or for some of us, the old effective tax rate. All right, so revenues and expenditures. There's a couple different ways, and you actually may have probably heard this at the TML thing. Not only do we look at things as either structurally balanced versus mathematically balanced, but we also try to budget too, either pessimistically or optimistically. And based off of whether we do it pessimistically or optimistically can ultimately determine, are we going to be maybe a little bit more liberal on revenues, or expenses or whatever. So when it comes to the general fund, especially property taxes, since that's the core of the general fund, we budget about 98.5% of collected revenues. Or sorry,
That's what's in this proposal, 98% of,
yes, it's close. It's not going to be to the penny because again, we're waiting on the truth and taxation sheet to come out.
based on the information you have.
But based off the information we have tonight, yes. So every year we budget at 98.5%. That is something that I'm big on. Again, it's why we kind of have some surplus in there, kind of each year on revenues.
And we collect that too. So
So
that's not a pie in the sky.
Oh, no. So that being said, so if we budget at a 58-cent tax rate, and historically, and we can get you that sheet too. I thought I had it here, and I apologize on that one. I had it on a checklist to do a handout. But we actually have pretty much anywhere between, why we went with 98.5% is that's the lowest that was ever there, and I think it was 98.7, and that doesn't factor in delinquent taxes. That's only ad valorem current taxes. So normally we collect anywhere between 99 to 99.8% of the property taxes that are levied in the city, and then again, that does not include delinquent property taxes. So our collection rate is really good. We budget at the 98.5%, one as a buffer in there, but it also gives us kind of that conservative estimate. Again, should something happen, any number of things that can happen.
All right, dumb it down real quick.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing, the budget that you are proposing to us tonight that we all have copies of is a budget that counts on 98.5%.
Of property tax, correct. And just because we budget at 98.5% doesn't mean, to Councilmember Allen's point, it's not up in La La Land. That 1.5% can still be realized on collections, whether that's through active collections or through delinquent collections. Which again is really kind of where we attribute that additional revenues across the city. Even though it's 161,000, across a $6 million budget, it still kind of reflects again that we're trying to budget low. And again, that's citywide. We're just talking about property taxes on this one.
Just as a quick question,
Yes, sir.
you're saying we're going to probably get 98%. Historically, have we ever not gotten the money?
I'd have to get back to you on that one because again, the historicals that we're looking at is just that year's collection. So come October, when those bills go out, by January or whatever, October, I don't remember what day, but we basically, boom, we're going to get $2 million or pretty darn close to it right out of the gate. And then we just slowly get the delinquents, the catch-ups and everything. So I can pull that information and we can do the historicals. But
Yeah, I think Donna would know, and I think she's nodding her head saying,
Yeah. I think one year when we did it, we actually, I think, had 102% or 103 because of delinquent property taxes. Again, now penalties. We're not going to dive into penalties. The state changed the law on penalties in the 87th legislation, I believe. We fortunately are not seeing a decrease, I don't think, in collections. It just might take longer, but there were some penalty breaks that were offered by the state that basically said if you had a payment plan or you did certain things, then you avoided the penalty fees. We factor in delinquent estimates. We do not factor in penalties. So anything that would be, I'm going to say, arbitrary, grants, of course, even though grants are substantial, we don't factor those into our revenue projections. We don't factor in, things like penalties or
I'm
anything.
just trying to figure out how you get to 102%.
Delinquent taxes. So yeah, so it would be 100% for that year, and then, or hell, it could only be 99 and a half, but then we got an extra percent from previous years. But again, yeah, that's not an area that we're really hurting on. All right.
So Dalton,
Yes, sir.
and I think this has been echoed by Pat, Dorothy, and myself. I think this presentation, you've done great. There's lots of good stuff in here, man, and I want you to be encouraged. One of the things that I think for citizens that would be good for them to see would be more historical data, because, like, yes, 2023 was a great year. 2024, we're looking at it, but I'd like to see 5, 10,
At least
15
3, yeah.
years.
So, no, you are 100% correct. And so that's going to kind of lead into some of the capital outlay that we'll get to, but really just kind of addressing it real quick, because I don't mind jumping around. We're here for the party.
sorry.
No. Because you're bringing up some great points, because Carrie and everybody else has echoed. Typically, I want to go 3 to 5 years back on everything. What really sucks is we have it, but we don't know how accurate it is. We literally are doing cash in, cash out, and really diving into what we've focused on as far as being structurally and mathematically balanced budgets to make sure that what we are doing going forward is accurate while we're cleaning up a massive mess of the financial systems. To that point, there is some software that we're going to be, ultimately requesting in this budget that's going to help not just on the transparency piece and providing historical data ultimately to council, but it's also going to provide, to the point that, that Donna had brought up about it's not user-friendly to our residents. I agree 1,000%. So that is where we are going to try to take some technology to, one, help our directors plan and prepare for those budgets, and CIP and personnel. One, provide a more efficient process, and again, historical data for council to be able to digest, whether that's graphically, whether that's raw data, whatever, and then the final output of that is it goes onto the website that can then be very simplistically defined and gone through by any end user, such as highlighting pie charts or whatever, that'll break down this information in a very seamless, timeless fashion. So yes, you are 100% correct.
Yeah, and I think we're all fine. We understand what was inherited by you in 2021. But even if you put a big caveat at the top, like never reviewed by current staff, but just give us, nothing's audited, so you can put unaudited on everything.
Yeah,
But
that's
if you
implied at this
you
point.
feel like you want to put a caveat up there, I'd like the numbers, even though they might not be numbers that you'll stand behind. I get it.
No, and the other side
I'd
too.
like them anyway.
No, and the other side too is, and again, this is something that I really push for this year. And again, it was what it was. I really wanted to get a proposed budget to y'all even sooner. And before we tried, but I really wanted to try to get a proposed budget to you sooner. So where we're going with some of this direction is going to be exactly that. The proposed budget, ideally, we're going to call it tonight. We want to be able to take technology and take where we're going, the audits, the forecasts, what we've done, and finally, once we get it all and put it all together, we want to provide basically different packages for y'all in a very forecasted preliminary point of view, so y'all have a very high level, even if we just talk about capital outlay and not dive into the minutia of it, but we talk about the high level. So by the time we get to this point in the budget process, we have solid numbers. Y'all have already seen it at least once or twice. Y'all are going through it. Directors are we're able to, really seamlessly update it, because unfortunately, a lot of these handouts that y'all are getting have been created from the ground up.
Right.
And so and not just created from the ground up, but verified and gone through to make sure that the information y'all get is consistent. And we're never going to get it right, 100% of the time, but we want to do our best that we can with what we have. So yes, that is a huge goal that I have for our team, and of course that I want to bring to council next year as well.
One quick question,
Yes, sir.
just because. On page 7, the FY 2023 M&O is 0.5075. On the next page, it's 5088. Am I not comparing apples to apples?
Again, some of the numbers may fluctuate whenever I jam this out.
If it's just a goof up, then I don't care.
It may-
want to make sure I wasn't.
Yeah, it may not be a goof up just because one of them may even be right, both of them may even be wrong until we get the true truth and taxation numbers. Because
He's talking about last year, though.
Only our tax
It
rate.
just says 5088 versus 507.
that was probably one of my spreadsheets and I probably goofed it up. But we can get you the accurate one if you need to.
It's not, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something that, little naps are nice, but
Oh yeah. All right. Let's see. We're on page 8. All right. So when we talk about general fund, we talk about enterprise fund, and then we talk about total combined city. So when you have your adopted budget proof in front of you, which is the Encode generated one that goes into general, interest and sinking, water, wastewater, et cetera, lots of numbers, awesomeness, easy to read, right? What's really great about this form, and Donna could probably attest to this as well, this form, or this report was game changing. We didn't have this report for the first year that we were here. And so whenever we created, or whenever we were trying to show council at the time, a high level summary of all of this very simplistically, we had to do it manually. And so this form that got created by Encode, or that we found, I don't know, Carrie did it, but ultimately, this was game changing for us. And so when we talk about the total combined budget for the fiscal year 24, we're proposing a $6.9 million budget. And again, I'm not going to dive into some of the minutia of the numbers, which is up about 6.4%, or about $57,000 compared to the FY budgeted amounts. Now, I'm going to caveat the budgeted amounts because I agree from both sides. And what we mean by budget amounts is budgeted versus either actuals or estimates, okay? So the way that the process typically will go, we're going to have the adopted budget that y'all are going to approve. Then as we start making payments, you're going to start seeing actuals of revenues and expenses, hit the books. And then at a certain point in time, when we start getting into budget season, so come April, May, we then start updating the year-end estimates. And this year, and to the point of kind of the $1 placeholder, and these are some of the things that get kind of lost. So when we go in there, we put a $1 placeholder really as a reminder that, hey, we need to go back and do it. Unfortunately, sometimes things get missed, and that was a hit on me. So with all that, I talk about both the budgeted numbers and the actuals, or the estimated, because I agree, and this is a big challenge that we had when I came on board, was when we were looking at, and if you look at the adopted budget proof, you see 21 actual, 22 actual. But what it didn't tell us was what was budgeted. And so for me, the budget is only one thing, because what did we actually spend? But then the actual doesn't tell me anything, because if we only spent $10,000, but they're budgeting for $50,000 every year, now we're skewed. In order for us to get that information, we had to pull 2 different reports into Excel, combine them very painfully, and then ultimately do a year-over-year analysis of budget versus actual, which is where we were able to trim a lot of, we're going to say, just unnecessary expenditures. We were spending only $10,000, but budgeting $50,000 every year. So some of the expenses were very skewed. And they didn't necessarily go over them. And so on here, we may, and if it gets confusing, we may talk about both. So before, we really hit on actuals, because I needed to know not just what was budgeted, but how much did we spend, so we can slowly make an accurate assessment. I'm confident now that when we talk about budgeted numbers, yes, there's going to be some variations, as we know, and those are going to get highlighted, better each year. But the budget comparisons now more reflect of what the previous year's actuals were, each year based off of what we're finding. So every year from a zero-based budgeting perspective, we are taking into consideration what was budgeted, what were the actuals, and why was it either up and down. So the next budget that we make may be higher or lower, but it gives us a really good picture. And as we get better at this exercise, we then can slowly close the gap and start going from a more pessimistic budget, which is kind of what we have now obviously for the right reasons. We don't want to overdo it, to maybe a more balanced, not optimistic one, but we can have more accurate data. So when we first started, the cone was really big, and as we're slowly starting to make improvements, we're starting to narrow that focus down. So if you have a question, whether it's budgeted or actuals, please let me know, and I'll try to clarify what some of these were. And just to clarify immediately on this, the little Christmas tree chart that you see, that 2023 number, this is on page 8 and flows into page 9. The 2023 numbers are estimates. So they are the re-estimated actuals, not the budgeted amounts. Again, those are, some of those may be in, not fully, we got to clean some of those up. Obviously, there was a $90,000, hit in there that we have to, to fix. So yes, not going to be perfect, but better.
Well, and just since he said that, it's not a $90,000 hit that the cash
That's not
hasn't been paid. Me and Dalton got paid.
Yeah.
I think, so, right, but.
I don't know.
Really, the expense needs to go from the general fund to the water. And this was a council suggestion when we did the budget last year, that our general fund was losing too much money. At the end of the day, necessarily, some of y'all might not think that an allocation is appropriate, but certain council members did. It's a common practice in city governments to split the executive salaries across the different funds.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when we checked it, I forgot to check the second box, and it didn't get split. So the overall expenditures across the city at this point in time are right. It's just that $90,000 needs to be moved from the general fund to the water and the marina. And then we can figure out what y'all think is the proper allocation for the future. But yeah, in the very beginning, when Dalton was hired and then when I was hired, both of our salaries were 100% within the general fund, which is distortive. Also, 30% to the water fund for both of us and 20% to the marina is probably distortive also. But we just got to figure out what the right balance is.
Yeah, and we try to pull some other stuff from different cities, and I mean it ranged. I mean it went from, you saw 50% of executive salaries going from from general fund to enterprise funds. There's really was no kind of rhyme or reason. What we did do, which we knew was right at the time, was we went from 6% splits, 8% splits, 12, 13% splits,
Numbers.
and make them better percentages. And then not just make those percentages from the salary whole, we then did that across their entire compensation package. So when y'all look at those numbers, it is prorated or split or allocated proportionately and appropriately.
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of allocations because I think it distorts operations. But if we're going to do them, what I'd like to do is just have a reasonable basis for the allocation. Like, Carrie doesn't spend 400 hours at the marina, I know, each year. So, I mean, yeah, I'm sure. But so, I think you guys know, and every year it might be different. We got a huge water project going on, which I'm sure took tons of time, get the bids and all. So I'm sure but I don't want to be fluctuating all over the place. But
Yeah,
some type of reasonable,
No, and really,
based on logic or based on something.
well, and really, I think the kind of the core focus on this, and regardless of when the budget gets adopted, at any point in time, it's fluid. We can always make changes. And so the most important part from a high level kind of point of view, the total combined revenues and expenses, it doesn't change the bottom line.
Right, but just because I don't know, why would you not just say salary, 100%, we're paying this person X amount of money, we're paying this other person X amount of money?
So we
Why are
can.
you splitting it up? What is the logic behind that?
So
I'm
there's-
totally
So there's a couple different logics, and we'll just dive right into it now. So when you look at like police and fire, they are non-revenue generating, entities. And so when you look at the general fund, especially in a city that is predominantly, ad valorem or property tax, there are some cities that will literally fund majority of salaries, less enterprises, right out of the general fund. And they'll just have the general fund that's, $1 million, expenses over revenues. Because when you look at the total combined budgets across the entire city, the bottom line is either revenue over expenses or it's balanced, whether that's structurally or mathematically. And so it's, some could call it funny accounting, some could call it, funny money.
People call it managerial accounting.
Yeah.
Which is fundamentally, you're trying to full cost each thing. So you're trying to full cost the police department, or you're trying to fully cost the water department. Dalton is over the water department. So to fully cost the water department, some of Dalton's time probably should go into water. And the question is, how much and how do you allocate it and
Yeah.
all that. But that would be, and some people love managerial accounting, and I just like cash in, cash out, and
Well,
I like the
think-
general fund standing alone,
I'm not
but I'm
suggesting
one
you're-
person.
Well, so,
Yeah.
and that,
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
but I'm not suggesting there's any funny business
That's the
at
base
all.
of it.
No, no, no,
I'm just
no.
Base
saying,
of it.
if we want to have transparency,
Yeah.
I think that, just as a thought,
so
if you put it in as city manager salary, boom,
here's what we
and
did.
it's very apparent.
So here's what we did this year, which was different than last year. In the detailed budgets and everything, we split out what percentage was going to that. Now, to Councilmember Bishop's point on this, as we introduce some technology into it, you're going to be able to go right to that stuff, go to salaries, and look through it. So as this progresses, you're going to be able to do that. So to the point of managerial versus governmental, when, in the private sector, hell, even nonprofit from like healthcare, yes, there's cash in, cash out, but your revenues are going to reflect your expenses and so forth. You're going to have a service or a product that's going to be offered, where for us, we have some services that are actually loss. When you have public safety, it's a loss. So when you start looking at, the general fund and trying to make it a standalone unit, especially, and this is probably the most important part of being a community like ours, when you're predominantly ad valorem rooftops, somebody's got to pay for it, or something's got to pay for it. Now, one of the questions that I'm going to ask, or I'm going to at least ask it, don't need an answer, but to kind of put in the forethought of your mind as we go through this, everything just costs money. The question is, at what cost? So when we go through this stuff, whether that's services, our service delivery model, our customer service, water, whatever, it doesn't matter. What is our service delivery model and what is our customer service expectations? Because that has a cost to it. And if we want to communicate, well, there's going to be a cost associated with that. And I'm not saying that any one of those are right answers, but this is where city council setting the vision, setting the policy, setting the budgets. This is where y'all really come in, because our direction and our guidance that we're giving on that ultimately is what's going to set staffing, budgets, that we're presenting to y'all, plans, designs, insert any number of things. So everything has a cost. The question is, at what cost, one, and what is the service delivery model and customer service expectations that our residents expect? And that could be a whole slew of different things, because we have to make the best impact, the most positive impact on the most amount of people, while mitigating the negative impact on the least amount of people. And that algorithm is always going to change. So, all right. So total combined. So when we're looking at this, let's go back to the adopted budget proof. And when we look at the approved budget, which, I'm sorry. I don't have that page, sorry.
I think it's 35,
The adopted budget proof.
this thing, with the funds down the side.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to check I was looking at the right spot.
Yeah, so no, that's the one I didn't have the packet one on. So when we look at this and don't get caught up on the requested budget versus approved budget, the way it's installed in there, it is. It's not installed yet, but if you look at the last column, which shows the 2023, 2024, it says approved, but it's obviously not approved. It's just the title. If you go down to the very bottom, you see 6.1915164. Top is revenues, bottom is the expenses. So when we take everything, revenues from all of our enterprise funds, our general fund, anything from the city coffers, or sorry, not city coffers, anything from the city's budget that we're planning for this year, those revenues and those expenses balance. So even though, for example, general fund shows $93,000 expense over revenue. And again, this kind of goes back to what you were, talking about, Councilmember Clune, is it depends on how much we want to see that negative number. And I think that's just really up to y'all and how we want to do that. We could show a higher increase in negative number in the general fund, but and there's different trains of thought from managerial accounting to governmental accounting. Really, the bottom line is from the general fund, looking at the entire fund balance, the entire city coffers budget, that's going to give you what the bottom line number is. Because here's the thing, I went to the Manifest movie. It all works together, right? It all comes together. It all connects. So there might need to be a big project, i.e. water, or roads, or fire trucks, or apparatus, or vehicles. If we tied each fund, for example, if we had to buy a fire truck at $1.6 million, and we wanted to say, well, that fund isn't tied, or that apparatus isn't necessarily tied to water, or maybe it's a portion of it is, does that mean that we're going to tank the general fund or pull it all out of fund balance? And again, that's exaggerating it, but the point of it is when our ad valorem taxes is predominantly makes up the general fund, and we don't offset it with sales tax and other types of revenue streams, it does get very challenging. And we're going to kind of dive into that with, on salary. So from a high level revenue expenditure overview, because we are going to dive into each department on what comprises this, is there any high level questions kind of on the adopted budget proof?
On page number 9,
Okay.
and just in general, you have these numbers for all these different categories of revenue and expenses and all that. Do you have, I know you do, some have looked at it, but is it available? How do we compare with these revenue and expenditures for other Central Texas communities of the approximate size of Morgan's Point?
So that is a rabbit hole that is very challenging. I'm not going to say no because we can make anything happen, but here's the challenge with that. If you have a city that, let's just say, is comparable in ad valorem taxes, but they bring in another $1 million of sales tax because their commercial property is valued higher. So when we look at cities, and especially when creditors look at cities, they look at what they'll call diversity of revenues or diversity of income. And you're going to have some cities that are going to be 40% sales tax and 60%, ad valorem. You're going to have some cities, and I'm going to use my old city, Mont Belvieu, as an example. They had $1 million per capita, and they had a low tax rate, but they were bringing in $1 billion worth of industry every year in sales tax. So every city is going to be different.
But is there not that kind of data available from Sitcog or somebody that can say, okay, for a community of 5,000 people that's, I don't know what, 90% ad valorem tax, how do these numbers balance? Same thing with staff levels and all of that. You can use a lot of words, but how do we compare with other communities of this size, of this? I mean, we don't have a lot of oil wells around here that I've seen, but how does this compare with comparable cities in this part of Texas? Is that data available? And I understand your point exactly.
It's not readily available. So what we try to do if we want to get some comparative analysis on it, we literally go into their budgets. We go into their budget books.
It's kind of like, when you're talking about property values or something,
Yeah.
what are the comps in the neighborhood?
Yeah. Well, and so
That's
so
kind of what I'm just
for example, that
questioning.
sheet that I passed around, it talked about the different, property tax, rates for, cities in Bell County. But what it doesn't show you is sales tax. Now, you can go in and put, sales tax, information from other cities. But here's kind of the point of, kind of segueing right into staff and salaries. That takes staff and salaries because that information isn't readily available. Because everybody's going through their budgets. That information does get installed or put into Comptroller, but not into a user-friendly, digestible thing. So I could go in and pull the sales tax and exemptions and all that, but then I would have to go to every comparable city that we want to go and compare and pull all the sales tax, information in there to do that. And then I'd have to go reach out to them and pull all of the FTEs or what does their staffing look like? And we've done that on a couple cities, here and there. But again, when you start comparing, because again, the other thing that'll change the whole game, what's the median home value? What's the median income of those areas? We have a higher median home value than most of Bell County in some cases.
Is that something that SitGov could provide information on?
I could ask them.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're going to have to do the same due diligence that we would.
Let them do it.
Yeah, we can ask. We can definitely ask. I mean, it's, every city's budget, I mean, as we go through it, every city's budget book is different.
Yeah, and then what services do they provide?
That's,
Do they have sewer system? Well, we don't have a sewer system. So I mean, you start doing those comparisons, and I love comparisons. I love to say, what's the percent of payroll
Yeah,
over
it gets-
revenue?
it
And
gets
da-da-da.
very
But
convoluted.
you
Asking if
really
that's available. Somebody already crunched those numbers. I mean, somebody wrote
Yeah.
a doctor's doctoral
So
dissertation on it.
From a
so,
municipal side, I'll ask around, but typically where we get this information from is usually from like Texas City Managers Associations. Each year, like some cities will put into, a budget survey or like kind of a budget stuff, and then we'll get, other stuff in there. But 9 out of 10 times, guess who it is? Pflugerville's, Georgetown's, Austin's, because they have the staff to do it. I don't even think we provided the information this year just because we didn't even have the capacity to provide that information. So, and then again, then you start comparing and going in and saying, okay, well, do they have full-time fire departments? Do they have full-service cities? Do they have roads and
Yeah,
streets?
but it's just like in.
Yeah. No, that one's a lot more. Yeah, that one's a lot more complicated because like sales tax, we can pull that information right from the comptroller and it's easy. Property taxes, it all goes through the appraisal district and it's pretty straightforward. So unless we actually like reach out to other cities or bring bring consultants in that literally do it for a living, I think there's a diminishing, return on a return on investment on what that would look like from staff time to getting the right information.
The question is just, is it something that's available that we just haven't turned over that?
Yeah, I'll definitely look around, but we haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I'll definitely ask that question though, and I'll get back with you.
Thank you.
Before we get too deep into here, can we take a quick 5-minute break?
Up to y'all. This is y'all's show.
I'm gonna take a 5-minute break.
Absolutely.
I just need to stand.
Me too. I don't think I can get up. Just ready to get into the meat of it right now.
So I went to that TML training.
Appreciate you being here.
School is about to start. What is the good stuff for you guys? I'm gonna work on it.
Won't have to worry about tomorrow, and then we'll meet
Get
again.
through it and see how it goes.
Pardon?
Let's just get through it and see how it goes,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Well, then we can also start again next Tuesday before the council meeting. And,
I don't know what's on the agenda for council, so we might have a
It's
full
gonna
agenda.
be pretty light, but here's the thing. Tomorrow, I would almost say marathon it tonight, because tomorrow, there's almost no point, because we're not gonna have the truth and taxation numbers until Thursday. So if we say, hey, let's go in 2 hours early before council with updated numbers, with a lot of the information that we're getting tonight, because tonight's, the great thing about it, as we're getting the feedback, we can then, it'll give us some time to do it. If we make a lot of changes or any substantial changes or anything tonight, the odds of us having it ready for tomorrow night are going to be slim, but then the numbers are still not going to change because we're not going to have the TNT numbers.
Yeah, what about
Consider
Monday then?
something later this week?
Yeah, later this week
Thursday,
or
Friday,
Monday.
or-
Let's get through this and then let's
Yeah,
kind of
I
go
think
from there.
so too, because
Right.
we might get through more and we'll see how much we need.
Okay, we're at salaries.
Okay, you ready, Dalton? You got it.
I am. So yes, so we're going to talk about salaries. Start again diving more into the weeds a little bit. So hey Carrie, did
Yes.
the presentation? Did the presentation get printed off?
Comp study?
Yeah. Okay, so we will get you guys the comp study. The comp study basically slide or presentation that they did for council, and that'll kind of just show the executive summary, the high level stuff of. Yeah, go print it off real quick, and we'll just keep talking about it and kind of go through this. So, an outside compensation study was conducted in 2022. It included salaries but not benefits. We were able to get that done before the budget. Prior to that, we had no compensation study. Everything was kind of just done either line item by line item on people, or it was adjusted, or there was either raises or COLAs. It was kind of sporadic, and we were trying to really get it all together. One of the big challenges that we had, even when bringing the finance director position on board, was, and I talked about it, during that time, was I don't have anything to base it off of, because if I just go look at generalized finance directors, they're not cheap. And so we didn't really have a good starting point. And then not to mention, anytime we brought somebody in, even if we did our due diligence and tried to find comparable pay or comparable salaries or benefits or compensation, we never had a range. So then we never really had a basis or a starting point, a baseline, and then we never really had a maximum to try to figure out, were we even in a threshold or what that threshold looked like. So last year we made a proposal to get an outside compensation study done. And the recommendation ultimately got the pay scale that is in your packets.
Yeah.
And so that gave us our first min, mid, and max. It really gave us an idea of where are we on the spectrum. Because the other challenging side, again, and once we get this stuff printed off, we actually, I think, had 18 out of 20 cities or 16 out of 18 cities. And the cities that we try to compare them to were comparable as far as, we're going to say region and geographically, but also smaller cities that were near larger cities. So as like Temple, Belton, and Morgan's Point, we potentially could either lose people to Temple or Belton or vice versa. We try to do some other comparable cities geographically that were in kind of similar situations that could lose people from small cities to large cities. Again, nothing's going to be perfect, because the other side, of this, and the other challenge that we faced was, what is comparable? We might have a utility billing clerk or an admin assistant or an executive assistant that might wear 7 different hats, and you can't necessarily pay them, for each salary or duty that they're performing. So it's trying to find whatever that balance is within that spectrum. The goal of the study, once we kind of got it, was ultimately to try to get everybody as close to midpoint as possible for that salary range. And again, that's where the pay grade and titles come into play. And so we try to get everybody as close to 90%. So again, there's no science to it really. It could be comparable all over. And again, it'll make more sense when the executive summary comes in, because the other side is can we compare ourselves to Georgetown? Absolutely not. So what they do is they factor in a geographical ratio that offsets those salaries based off of, proportional or similar job duties or job descriptions. And what it did is it gave us a phenomenal starting point, especially since we didn't have one before. We didn't really have one. I felt confident in, even if we found old pay ranges, from previous administrators. One, they were probably outdated anyways, and two, we didn't have anything to really kind of go forward. And so what that created, and some of the things that we identified, was initially when we presented kind of a rough plan to council, there was about 10 employees that weren't going to get anything because they were so far over market value initially that we went back to the drawing board, and council said, hey, let's make sure that we balance it very carefully. Let's make sure we don't not pay somebody because for any number of reasons, but we had to rip the Band-Aid off at some point. And so the compromise was, it ended up only coming down to about 2 people that ultimately were flat, but some of those people at the time were 100% or right at midpoint or over midpoint at that time. Where we had others, and you'll see in the executive summary, we had others, police, fire, and even some of the general staff, it's broken down, general, police, and fire, that were so far under market on the 50th percentile that it was ultimately getting the due diligence to get them back up, or at least get them back up somewhere closer than what they were at before. And so that cost, I believe, is about $250,000 in the 2023 budget. So this current budget that we're operating in is about $250,000. That got everybody close-ish to the 90% of midpoint. Now, one of the things that we did on this, which I'm going to be the first to tell you I don't like, we took the mid-max and we kind of put it onto a step program. And the reason why we did that was we have an average tenure of about 6 years, which is pretty high, which is a good thing in a lot of cases. But we had employees and we have some team members that are on the job 13, 15, 16 years. And so we had to find a basis of a starting point to not just factor in where are we going to put them on the spectrum or the scale, but how are we going to do that? Are we going to do years of service? Are we going to do experience? I mean, there's a lot of factors that we had to play in. I don't like steps personally. Typically, public safety is about the only one that we'll keep. Ideally, we would recommend in the future, next year, to keep steps in. It's a lot easier to balance market among the public safety professionals just because that data is pretty widely public. And then ultimately, we need a massive overhaul of our performance evaluations and reviews. And then ideally, we would go to more of a percentage-based, merit-based increase, for, we're going to call them just really administrative folks. We're not there yet. We're not there this year, and the goal is to get there next year. And so when it comes to the revenues, or when it comes to the compensation revenues, and again, there's a million different ways we can kind of swing this. There's different data points, there's different things that we can look at that can skew it a multitude of ways, which is why when we did the revenues and compensation across the general fund, water, wastewater, even though INS doesn't count because it's not used for operations, that can skew that number a little bit. I just took it based off of the property taxes because even though it goes into the interest and sinking fund and is restricted to that, it is still revenue coming into the city that impacts the bottom line. And that's the only reason why I left that in there, because it does balance the bottom line from that regard. So when you look at the total combined revenues to compensation, now remember that $3.04 million of compensation, that is everything. That is health insurance, that is FICA, Medicare, Texas Municipal Retirement System, the city's portion of it. That is anything and everything that is going to cost us, that the city pays for an employee, to include hourly, to include seasonal, to include overtime. That's everything, not just salaries. That includes even, we call them full-time equivalents versus part-time equivalents. That includes everybody. So that number would come down. I don't have that number. I can get it for y'all if you like. But basically, if we took the overtime, part-time, seasonal stuff that would typically not be factored into what we call the full-time equivalent. But what I wanted to show was the conservative number of all in from overtime to anything and everything spent, whether that's a full-time person or a part-time person, or even a seasonal lifeguard. And so that's 44% of the total combined budgets. So when you look at the general fund and we look and say, all right, that's 64%, of the general fund is tied into salaries. every city is going to be different. We pulled some benchmark or some just comparable cities. Again, we're just looking kind of in general. You have cities that are 44% just of police department coming out of the general fund. Because again, there are certain aspects of the city that is just not going to, take in money. A general fund ideally is not going to necessarily be able to stand alone for projects. Most of your salaries and benefits are going to ultimately be tied into the general fund. Where that number could be offset or skewed, and I know one of the other sheets, it talked about if you just look at property taxes alone, it could be 76% of just property taxes. Well, the question is where else are we going to get the funding? If we don't have commercial, we don't have sales tax, we don't have other revenue streams, and we're
Yeah,
only.
so I did that, and
Yeah.
so that astounded me, because here's the way I looked at it. I'm a resident, I'm paying $1 of sales tax, and 76 cents of my dollar is going to compensation for my city. So where are my roads? Where are my, that covers maintenance, and it covers fire and police, but it doesn't cover capital, and it doesn't cover, investments,
And-
projects, like, even software, even desks, even PCs, whatever. That's 76% of our revenues go to compensation.
Just property tax.
I'm sorry, property tax, and that's just in the general fund.
That's just
So I'm
property
not
tax.
including water, marina, I just consider them, kind of separate.
But and that's where from the municipal side. So in the private sector side, you typically are going to have 33% of your revenues will be salaries. That's a good benchmark because their services provided.
Repeat that again.
So a private company who's offering services or products, and again, it's going to fluctuate. You're going to typically have 33% of your revenues will be salaries, compensation, benefits.
Right.
In a city, it's a little bit more challenging because obviously you're not going to necessarily, without property taxes, if you wipe property taxes out, there's really no revenue for us. That would go down to about $280,000 in sales tax alone. So yes, it is a data point.
Yeah,
and it is a data point.
It was a surprising data point.
But is it a true comparable data point from the city-wide perspective? In my opinion, my professional opinion, I don't think so. Because it goes back to the question we asked about 15 minutes ago. At what cost? What is the service delivery models that we want our residents to have? What is the customer service that our residents expect? And at what cost are we willing to pay for it? Because we're not saying that all these things have to happen, but again, there's a second and third order effect in everything. If I pull from one, I'm going to have to either give and take in another. We can't have our cake and eat it too. To the point of roads, this is one of the biggest challenges, and again, not just with salaries, but let's just look at the overarching state of the city ultimately. We are in the ultimate game of catch-up. Not catch-up as far as the tomato sauce, but catch-up as far as we have roads that are behind. We have infrastructure that's behind. We have stuff that has been,
Audits.
hate to say neglected to a certain extent, but that either has only been planned or talked about and not actioned. And so we are now in this unique state of affairs where the reason why I don't want to go back 3 years on salaries is, to me, what's the point? We had a third-party compensation study done, and we're playing catch-up. So I'm going to tell you right now, yeah, of course it was a substantial increase, from that. So the question is, do we agree with the compensation study?
We haven't seen it yet.
No, I know, and we gotta, and we're gonna get that compensation study to y'all. So that's my fault. It was supposed to be printed out, and y'all are supposed to have it on here. But the point is the third-party group came in. Again, this wasn't Dalton Rice saying this. This was a third-party group that does this. They have their reputations and everything that they have to do. And that was vetted through multiple other cities that have used them, for similar studies. The question is that where we're at or not? And again, we'll talk staff.
That's where we're at. Because
Well, yeah.
we implemented the study.
No,
we've had a
absolutely.
year of salaries.
Well,
at that
and so
level.
that's kind of
Yeah, so
going back.
That's where we are.
So that's kind of going back in time. Is we know that there's a substantial increase, in obviously revenue or not revenues, substantial increase in salaries, in benefits and everything. Well, naturally, because we've been playing catch up. So same thing with roads. Same thing with with water rates, and we'll talk about water rates and marina rates and other things, here in a little bit. There's a couple ways you can look at it. You can look at it as, do you incrementally adjust and increase every year to ease the burden, or do you take the hit and say, well, this is 50% over, a 7-year period. but the compounded annual growth may only be 1, 2, or 3% depending. So again, we have to look at all the factors and not just one. Yes, the percentage of ad valorem taxes and salaries is a data point, but so is all the other things. And I think from a city perspective, we're not in the business of just properties. We're in the business of customer service. We're in the business of water. We're in the business of sewer, painfully. You know, we're in the business of safety and public safety. I mean, we're in the business of a multitude of different enterprises, whether they make money or not. Then you add the customer service. So there's a lot of things to factor in when we look at this as a big picture. So
Another data point, if you look at the bottom of page 9, where it has revenues and compensation, and you take the 3,000,044, and you divide that by 35 employees, that's $87,000 per employee.
and
A
so
data point.
And so another data point on that too, and we ran a couple comparable cities. We used City of Belton because again, this is more of a ratio, right? This is a ratio of a perspective based on full-time employees to revenues. So it doesn't matter how big or small, it's just a ratio. Belton's is 92, 93,000 per employee. So
But they have a lot, I mean, how many,
it doesn't matter
well,
though.
no, I mean, because they have a big city to run. We have a smaller city.
But again,
So-
this is a percentage or a ratio. So
Right.
they might have 140 employees, but this goes back to diversity of revenues. If we pull just their ad valorem taxes, what does that show? And I didn't run those numbers on there because again, they're pulling in millions of dollars in sales tax. So when you have all of these things, yes, it's a bigger city, but when you look at
Yeah, but this is just payroll divided by the number of employees.
correct,
is
so
the average, so it's not related to property taxes.
no, you're
just
right.
a
It's not related
number.
to property taxes.
Okay.
It's an average, but to the point of it's a bigger city, it's not about the size of the city, it's about the ratio. So when we look at whether it's managerial or financial or statistical based, you know, some management decision-making process, right? A ratio is a perspective, whether that's billions or one. So whether you have 150 employees with the larger city that has a larger revenue, the ratio is going to balance out. So when you do a simple data point that says $86,000 per employee is coming from our revenues, and Belton is doing 92,000, that's the whole point of that. So again, data points that all have to be factored into everything. So real quick, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Some of my flow I want to change up. Go to page 11.
Can I
In the
ask just one
yes, ma'am.
question about salaries? You have recommended a 2-step increase for team members and a 1-step increase for directors. Why would we not do a COLA?
So
I'm just.
let me,
It's for-
yeah, no, absolutely. So actually, you know what? We're not going to jump around. Let's go to page 10, if we weren't already on page 10. So the reason why we're not recommending a COLA this year is because of the health insurance cost that the city is having to take on. The shift from TML to Blue Cross Blue Shield, because it was such a substantial amount, and while the employees may not necessarily directly be, you know, I'm going to say impacted by that from a take-home perspective, that is still a compensation and a benefit, a fringe benefit that they are receiving. It is unfortunate, and you know, and we understand it, which is why we're recommending, again, this year for the step piece.
So would the step be less than the COLA?
Well, so the step is going to be based off of the pay grade. So each step, and that's where we wanted to show the pay grade was. Yeah, so depending on where they fall in that pay grade spectrum, is going to be based on the step. It averages, I think, about 3% across the whole spectrum, roughly. But, excuse me, we decided not to, again, this is just our thoughts on this. This is really, you know, important discussion points of council. The reason why I proposed not doing a COLA this year was because strictly related to the health insurance. Because the city was taking such an increase to get to a new market value, that's why we recommended that. With the health insurance, good segue into that. You know, so there was some discussion, obviously last meeting when we got away from TML Health, and the substantial impact that it was going to be, whether that was with TML Health at 31%, which is a moot point anymore, so let's not even talk about that, versus Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was going to be a 46.6% increase. One of the things that we had kind of recommended, and again, wasn't approved, but discussion points as we were coming into the budget, excuse me, was how do we make sure that the burden of 46.6% does not get placed onto, really it's going to be our dependent coverage. And what we had recommended, because what we had recommended to offset that, and again, we kind of briefly talked about it, was if we take the dependent coverage, and not on the premiums as a whole, but just on what they were making this year, or what they're paying for dependent coverage this year, and we apply 12% increase, which is, again, a historical average of the highest amount Blue Cross Blue Shield would hit them with, typically in the small group market, then that's going to only have an impact on those who have dependent coverage by 12%. And then we would recommend that the city, for 1 year, again, not in perpetuity, not a permanent thing. I do not want to recommend a permanent solution yet until we have some stability, but offset that for 1 year, which we're projecting is going to stabilize next year, because if Blue Cross Blue Shield next year comes in at 7% or 8% or 10% or 12%, that's going to go on the entire premium versus just on that. So by next year, we can either hit them with a 46.6% increase this year or a 12% this year. The city would roughly absorb about $33,000 in cost, which we had kind of talked about when I think Councilmember Allen had brought up $150,000. Again, we didn't really have numbers, but it was going to be roughly about $29,000 to $30,000 depending. What's also kind of unique too is Brinson Benefits, our brokerage service. They're actually going to help out and offset some of the cost, because they know that we took a very unique step forward to take care of our employees, and so they are offsetting some of that cost as well. But yeah, so the question is we know Blue Cross Blue Shield is the direction that we're going to go. That is the one that's going to be $116,000, and the other question would be do we want to offer some dependent coverage, again, for 1 year just to get them up to market carefully?
I think that'd be and again, man, I'm all about our
Yeah.
little guy, like, 'cause I am the little guy. It's very hard for the city to then take that away after a year. Like, I mean, I would be pissed,
So
language, if someone did that to me.
So here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, and this is, even though we're talking about it publicly, and obviously those who have dependents know, the reason why I think this is different than a permanent benefit is they're never going to see it. And the reason why they're never going to see it is if they're doing for a child coverage care, which is about $178 per pay period, the only thing that they're going to see is it go up 12%. That is it. We're not giving them money. We're not reimbursing anything. The only thing that's being talked about is we are only taking what they were making per pay period, going up 12%. Again, we're not reimbursing anything. And then next year, whatever the market comes back with, they come back with. So they are not, even though we're talking about it publicly, it's not like we're going in and saying, hey, we want to offer a 25% dependent coverage care, and then, oop, gotcha, we're taking it away next year. No, this is something very different, that even though we are talking about it in public, and obviously the team is very aware of that who have dependent coverage, one, they know it's only for 1 year, but two, it's not about providing them the money. It is about easing the burden on them on what their pay period cost is going to be, or what they're going to feel on their paycheck. That $30,000 or whatever estimate it's going to be as, they do not see that.
That was another thing that I wrote down, actually, like, because I don't know your guys' the pay schedule. So are our employees weekly? Are we
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly?
Bi-weekly. Yeah, bi-weekly. So yes. So to that point, no, because I agree. I think I even talked about it. I do not want to offer a permanent dependent solution until the rates stabilize. I do also, however, believe that we need to offset at least some of the costs for 1 year to make sure that we ease the burden on the dependent coverage only. And it's a very small group of folks, but the alternative is we hit them with 46.6% this year, which they will feel in their paychecks, versus a 12%. And again,
Which they'll also feel on their paychecks.
but here's the thing, though. That's going to be realistic across the board no matter what. I mean, we can safely assume on health insurance that it's going to go up. The question is, which is the big change from TML, is we were very uncertain what they were going to go up each year. I mean, we had a 50% increase over 2 years just in TML Health alone, which is why it was such a, yes, ma'am.
So by delaying this year, though, will they not have to then absorb a great increase next year?
No. So the reason why, let me.
They still will have to pay this 46% next year,
Well,
plus
so
the 12% increase.
Well, so here's where the numbers, where it gets kind of confusing, because I actually confused myself when I was running it, and then Carrie helped me. This increase, so we cover 100% of employee cost. So by us taking the child coverage, that is on the employee's I'm going to say take home, but paycheck amount. We are taking everything that the city was paying, pulling that out based off of this year's coverages, right? Or based off of this year's stuff, and then applying 12% just to their pay period or monthly whatever amount. So that is on a very small, we'll call it micro level. When Blue Cross Blue Shield comes back next year and says, hey, they're going to go up 7 or 12%, whatever it's going to be, that's going on the entire premiums across the board. So when we started running the numbers, because when their take home was 12% here, and then you turned around and applied the 12% across the entire premiums, now it balanced itself out from market, because it wasn't just on the pay period side, it was on the entire employee side. Because remember, once the employee cost goes up, because we're covering 100% of the employees, if the employee cost goes up another 12%, that's automatically coming back out of the dependent coverage, so their increase is going to ultimately be market starting next year. And then, of course, we're going to say the unrealized stuff, because we're never going to see it again, is by only going up 7%, ideally we're going to benchmark TML, because if TML goes up 20% or 21%, it's not a savings necessarily, but we at least can provide counsel saying, hey, we probably made the right decision, going down this road for our employees. So,
But it's a $33,000 additional cost into compensation that we would be approving in the budget, in addition to,
It's not quite 33.
oh, okay, well,
I think
Well, I think after he did it, but yeah, I think
it was like 29.
like 29,000.
okay, so I was
Yeah,
just using his number.
I mean,
Okay.
29, 33, I mean, but yes.
Whatever, okay.
So I think the question here, for council ultimately is, do we hit them with the 46.6% increase this year across the board
Let me
and
just
give them
ask you
market?
this, where'd you get the 12%?
So the 12% is.
What if we let them take half of the increase? Like if it's 46% increase, the city takes 23 and they take 23.
That-
I mean,
and
like
on-
where did you come up with the
So
12?
the 12% is, again, the blue.
Average of Blue Cross Blue.
The Blue Cross Blue Shield small group, that is the highest typically average, like that is like the,
Typically, though, it could be different.
Yeah, but
Hold on,
we're
no,
not-
hold on,
but
hold on, hold
We're
on.
changing plans.
no, hold on, but that's what I'm getting at is the 12% is the small group highest. On average, it's anywhere from 7 to 10% on Blue Cross Blue Shield small group. We went to 12%, which was the historical highest amount that you would see in it. And again, I think they had kind of said it, and I like the analogy is, all ships rise together. So even if we saw a 13% increase, well, guess what? Every other payer is going to be in the same kind of situation, or boat, pun intended. So yes, I think this is ultimately a council decision. This could be one of those things where let's just throw a really quick scenario with no numbers on it. If we say, all right, let's put half of the percentage onto them now, or half of the 46.6% onto them now. Would a COLA be an option? But if a COLA is not an option, or if a COLA is an option, the 33,000 or 29,000 ultimately is a cheaper 1 year versus applying a COLA, because again, if you say, hey, take half of the 46.6% and no COLA, you're putting it onto the employee.
But they're getting step increases based on a compensation study.
Correct. So we need to go back and look at the numbers to make, to find out on the steps is how much of a delta, how much of a delta is going to be. So if
It's on the salary sheet you gave us,
yeah,
or Carrie
It
gave
is,
us.
it's on the salary.
well, I'd have to compare that to with what their impact is going to be from the dependent coverage standpoint. So again, this is not on the employee side. This is only on the dependent coverage side.
Oh, I understand completely.
Yeah, and so with
Because the employee side is more like 116 that the city's absorbing
Correct.
this year. Right.
correct,
So this is in addition to the employee.
yeah, this and
Only
again,
coverage. 116,000, right.
yeah, and so again, this is ultimately a council decision on this. I mean, with us not doing the recommending the COLAs because of the hit, with yes, they're getting the step increases, and we just have to look at the increase in healthcare costs to find out is that going to be a wash on their raise? I mean, is it going to be
Well,
a,
and
you
we're
know?
in inflation, like, I mean, there's so many variables.
Well, I mean, so yeah, there's so many variables.
So hard.
Because the other side of this too, like the state of Texas, they're doing 5% across the state this year for basically raises. Now, again, we don't tie in with the state, but we didn't run even really CPI. CPI is, I think, roughly 3.9. We didn't dive into all of that because we knew that whether it was 116 or 150,000, we knew that was a pretty substantial increase that was benefiting our employees both directly and indirectly.
And in the long term, in the short term, in the long term, yeah, I'm sorry?
Most school districts are doing 3%.
On COLA, but what about raises? 3% COLA and raise, or, okay, 3% across, yeah, and so in municipal side, a lot of times you'll see both the either step or salary increase, percentage base, whatever, and then some cities will offer a COLA or something. Again, this is one of those things where ultimately this is one of those tough decisions that council has to make on
Yeah,
this.
so here's another data point. And it's on the sheet I gave you. It's number 2 under primary areas of concern. So our revenues, our general fund revenues, and again, I'm just looking at the general fund because I'm putting the enterprise funds away. Our general funds revenues in the last 2 years have been increased about 200,000. In this plan, the compensation increases on a $200,000 revenue increase is $460,000. So we are spending almost 2.5 times our revenue increase in compensation. So,
and so-
where our expenses are going like this and our revenues aren't
So here's,
on the just on compensation alone.
So
We
here's-
know we have roads and we know we have other things.
So here's the other side too, and this kind of is really a great segue ultimately into staffing. Because this goes back to anything and everything that we do is when we look at a data point and we look at the entire, big picture. Let's even just take the general fund from a very static, simplistic point of view or data point. We go back to 2018, so I'm on page 11 now. On page 11, and we're looking at the employee staffing, the full-time equivalents. 2018, we had 27, and we're at 35, or requesting 35 for this year. Depending on, again, how you look at this, were we ever doing it the right way from the get-go? We had such a large increase in salaries, but is it because we maybe were not doing it as much through compensation studies before? Again, when we are in catch-up, there is a lot of variables that are going to factor in. And so, yeah, we might see a massive increase, but looking at the staffing just from the number standpoint, a 6-year compounded annual growth. So all that means is if we say that we went from 27 to 35 full-time equivalents from 2018 to 2023, if we put a compounded annual growth to that, over 6 years, that's 4.4% increase in staff. At 7 years, this current budget year that we're recommending is a 3.78% increase. So if we take this model across the board and say, okay, what's appropriate? Same thing with rate increases. People are upset if you raise the rates 50%, but if you did that over 10 years and it was only 1.2% each year. So when you play catch up, you got to make sure we look all the way back to see, are we making those right decisions and where are we going?
And every head count is on an average, we can add head count at different rates, but it's not just the salary, it's 30% overhead of taxes and insurance, health insurance, and he's got the retirement in there too, so he has it fully loaded.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got the desk, and you've got the computer, and you've got the software, and everything that
Space.
goes along with a head count.
Yeah, and so, and kind of touching on that some more. And again, these are just really giving everybody more questions and answers, which is, I'm not going to be jealous of y'all's seats on this point. But it really kind of goes, again, to the same question that I had asked. What is the service delivery model that we want, and what is the customer service expectations of our residents? From the city manager standpoint, from a staffing side, and we're going to dive into this in each kind of department, but really we can kind of talk about it as a whole because we're here. Ultimately, we have one retirement that's going to happen at the end of September, and that's going to ultimately dissolve the executive assistant position. That position ideally will roll into the city secretary position, so that position would go away. So again, in some of the planning and preparation and succession that we've done, one, with dealing with some of the catch-up side of things, Because in 2018, at 27, employees, again, let's just look at City Hall, since that's kind of the admin side is, I think, the topic of contention. You look at 5 people. Well, what has that gotten us now? Where's our state of affairs now from some of the admin side that we've desperately needed to, again, I know the right person for the right seat and let them do their job is important, but there's also a lot that comes with that too. So I just had a massive brain fart, but when you look at the full-time, when you look at the full-time equivalents, but when you go back in time and you get to the point where you're at, my opinion, my professional opinion as your city manager, I know what I was talking about. So the other side is we want to abolish the grant coordinator position and ultimately realign that and turn that into a senior accountant position. I'm actually going to make a request on that, later today, which we'll talk about for August 8th, because we don't have it on the agenda here, but I want to put the bug in y'all's ear now and open discussion on it. Fire department's requesting 1 full-time firefighter. That would ultimately give 24/7 coverage with a full-time person, and of course supplement with volunteers. And then the other one is the office manager position out of public safety. That one is probably going to be the most controversial one this evening, and I can see it both ways. There's pros and cons to it on both sides. Ultimately, from the office manager side, some of the big changes, especially in the police department, as Chief Schutze came in, there was a lot of deficiencies, there was a lot of gaps. There was a lot of things that needed to be caught up, and he's 100% more than capable of accomplishing it, and he has. Not to mention both fire chief and police chief are working directors, way more so than not. If I pulled Chief Vasquez off of his normal shift and put him on a 40-hour week to accommodate admin, that's going to be a small gap of coverage, to the point of everybody in our city ultimately is a jack of all trades. Multiple hats are being worn because there's multiple functions that have to be done.
Because we're a small city.
Because we're a small city, absolutely. We don't have the opportunity,
Resources.
to have specialties in one area.
I think the problem with this, Dalton, is like we're looking at this compensation and it's like, and again, I'm not speaking for anybody but myself.
Yeah.
And probably many citizens. It's hard for me to justify adding 2 more positions at this point.
Yeah, and that's a decision that
And
council
it
has to make.
sucks. It truly sucks because I don't want to be that guy because I know everybody's overworked.
Well,
I know they are.
And there's different ways to do it. Like, so we are so burdened administratively in our safety facility because of all the reports and everything that gets done.
Yeah.
Okay, but when that safety policy came through, the first thing I said about all the facility inspections and all the, which I love safety, when we need to do safety things, but it's like, is this going to add an administrative burden to our fire chief and our police chief?
And really, that's
And-
less.
no,
of-
but
that's
let me
gonna be less
finish.
on
So I think what we need to do is, if we have a lot of admin, I am all for cutting back on anything you guys think is not absolutely essential. I love your monthly reports. I mean, there's so much information in there. Hopefully that's just spit out of a system, but how much of that is a huge burden? So if you're doing it for us, if you're doing it for council, then talk to us about it. Because maybe we'll say, yeah, if that report takes you 5 or 6 hours, please don't do it.
Well,
Or you can stand up here and just give us information rather than creating a
Well,
report.
and here's
So that's my challenge to you guys on that.
Well, and here's the issue, and I mean, and ultimately, that falls in my wheelhouse, and the reports, the monthly reports, are council driven. Every single report in there has been driven by councils before you, and so
Look at what we're requiring.
well, and so here's the other side of this too. Again, alleviating the burden, right? So let's say, and again, everything is different, and this is where I'm not going to say change is tough. It's not about the change. It's about, all right, council comes on board, somebody wants something else, and then like, oh, let's kill it, and then boom, next council comes along, hey, I want to see this report, or hey, let's do this report. And the thing is, those ebbs and flows happen in cities way too much, which does create additional burden on the staff.
Yeah, I'm unaware of anything that we've asked for, in our first 90 days anyway, of the staff for us. exclusively.
Maybe Carrie.
So, definitely Carrie.
Well,
We're
and
gonna
again,
address that.
and again, not to say that those decisions have to be made now. So, like I said,
Yeah.
this budget is built off of information that we get from the directors that we then present to y'all. At the end of the day, the information that we provide to council is, I'm going to say, a conservative approach to this. And in my opinion, my professional opinion on this, and obviously I'm, in the role doing this, we were at 35 employees last year. We're recommending unfunding one of the maintenance employees. So ultimately, we're only adding one additional employee this year. So because of the realignments, because of everything else. Here's the thing. I think it's going to stabilize because, again, seeing it on the ground every single day over the past 2.5 years, from the operational side to the administrative side, what we're doing, a great example is I know we need to update our personnel policies. Hell, Mayor Green had kind of tasked us with that when I first came on board. I think Donna did as well at one point. Have I done that? Nope. I don't have the capacity for it because some of the stuff that we have on the administrative side was lacking, and I do think that we are finally to that point to where it is stabilizing from an administrative side.
But on something like that, I mean, it is important. It's very important. But some of it with a city hall, a liaison can be outsourced. We have, and just to use the employee handbook, we have one. It was done, I don't know, 15 years ago. But we have
2012.
one. And so how hard would it be, rather than adding staff to do stuff like that, why don't we really take a hard look at outsourcing with a city hall at liaison? I mean, you can't just turn over things to consultants, but.
No, and that's a great point, and we kind of briefly talked about the other day, but let me caveat this, and this is 90 days in, y'all are still learning a lot of stuff, of course, I learn every day. Here's the reality of this. When we brought to council about outsourcing to bring in a compensation study, you thought I was pulling teeth. $23,000, we've even heard some stuff on roads. I'd rather spend $50,000 on roads versus, a study. Here's the thing. At what point, and again, I can only go off the 2.5 years that I've been here. Anytime I've brought something that would be either a study or something to outsource, guess what? The only study that I've accomplished in 2.5 years that I got, and I think I killed 17 dogs and mothers and everybody else, was the comprehensive plan from 1994. Outside of that, and of course the compensation study.
What
But-
a 2021 CES? That wasn't yours?
That was not mine. That was before my time. Because I'm definitely not taking credit for that one. So,
Well, let's move forward.
well,
I
no,
mean,
I think it's important
Yeah.
though. I think this is an important testament to council because I agree 100% with Councilmember Allen on this. But if we're going to outsource it, then we got to put our money where our mouth is and actually do it.
I understand that everybody's overworked, man.
Yeah, always,
100% get that.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
am overworked too. Like, you are overworked. These guys are overworked. I'll never, there's got to be another way. And
Well,
at
so-
this point,
So I will tell you this though. On the flip side of this, overworked or not, I will tell you that this city council has fallen in on a phenomenal team. The team that has been enhanced and improved and built upon over the past 2.5 years. I mean, y'all could not be more lucky and more fortunate on what we built. And the great thing about, I don't like to use the term overworked because every single team member here ultimately loves their job. They love what they do. They love coming to work. I mean, that's why we're sitting at a 90% retention rate over 2 years in some very tough times. So yeah, no, here's the bottom line. Do we need any position? Absolutely not. The reality of it is our team is going to make it work. And the only thing as city manager that I can do is provide you those outputs or the deliverables that just aren't going to happen. And some of those we're just not going to realize until, maybe even council's like, hey, where's this? And be like, sorry, it's just not going to happen.
well,
we just
this
don't
might
know.
sound like a naive question, but I'm gonna keep chasing this rabbit for a second. So, as we get closer to getting the audits done, right, and we look and we see where we're actually at, and then let's say 6 months down the road, we're like, you know what? I think we do need to hire another firefighter or whatever.
Yeah.
Then we say, all right, let's do this. Like,
And so here's the great thing about this. And this is where I think
some water.
no, and so this is
These reinforcements.
well, this is where I think this is really great, and I'm actually really glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because you're 100% correct. There's nothing wrong with doing mid-year salary increases. Nothing wrong with doing mid-year, COLAs. cities across the board now, that's exactly what they're doing. They're doing a beginning of the year budget one. Excuse me. Doing a beginning of the year budget one, and then 6 to 8 months when they start realizing actuals, they potentially do another one based off of market. So you're starting to see now split year stuff. You know, when we built this budget, we also built a prorated salary into it. So we actually said outside of the senior accountant, again, I'll talk about that one here in a second.
Yeah, I want to talk about.
We're recommending that no hire, whether that was fire or the office manager, was going to be hired until January 1. So we built in a 3-month, really, we'll call it a buffer, but a prorated amount anyways. So again, there kind of this is two parts, because I agree with everything that y'all are saying, and very just kind of unique. I do really like, and I appreciate that. I think this council not being afraid to look at the mid-year stuff and saying, hey, maybe we should really address this, or maybe we really should go down this road.
If I may, it occurs to me that we're sitting here looking at a bunch of numbers and listening to a bunch of babble back and forth, and we have neglected the two individuals in this room that have asked for these positions. My question is to my fellow council members, myself included, have you approached any of these people and asked them specifically why they want this? And I think to a head, the answer is probably no.
Well,
So-
and
Because
I
Dalton
would-
does not encourage that.
Well, but I would like to take
Sorry.
a second.
You would rather I not go talk to
I
Matt and
I
Tara.
would love to hear from them.
Yes,
Exactly.
I would too.
I-
but
I would
that's
like-
not the way this protocol works in the
I would
city
like our
right now.
chiefesses,
Yeah.
yeah,
to-
that's why they're here.
yeah, just a quick, because and I'm trying to stay out of this one, obviously, because I have a
Karen, we're
little
not
bit of
throwing you under the
partiality.
bus,
but-
and Matt, we're not throwing you under the bus because I know that that's hard. But it would be awesome to hear.
Oh, I would bet beyond a shadow of a doubt they're both prepared.
All right, let's hear it.
Hell with you, I'm out of here.
Like, let me get my PowerPoint.
Looks like Matt. Yeah, I'd love to. I'll just go get it.
Karen, do you want to go first, actually? Sure, I'll give it to you first. I'll give it to you.
With your permission, I got a graphic. It's nothing that's outside of whatever.
Yeah, whatever y'all need. This is y'all show now.
3 minutes, Taryn, is what you've got now.
So, pass out, there's information here historically about the fire department staffing. And we're presented, into this budget year.
Wherever.
So, what we are. I know there's been a little bit of confusion about how much the fire department
To digest.
When I started with the fire department in 2017, October of 17, what was the third? Fourth of the firefighter added somewhere along the way. When I came on board, the schedule was Monday through Friday, like 8 to 5, and the firefighter was home. Still respond to calls from time, after hours, management and volunteers. There's been a shift locally, not just in our city. In fact, our city's done very, very well. We've got sitting around 21 staff, including the 4 paid that's phenomenal. That's actually higher, about 12.
Fabulous. It's stunning. Yes.
We're not trying to kill volunteer work. That's part of the reason I love what I do here is because people with volunteers, so it keeps you back. So that's why I come back. Plus, I like you. All that aside, we added the first time we've ever had a position last week. We brought Names on board the volunteer side, career side. I'm not going to compare us with PD, but we're about half the staff, about half the budget. We go to work. It takes a lot more people. I mean, officers, don't think this is a
Competition.
No, no, no.
but you go to fire, it takes 7 people first call. We don't have 7 people. But not look at the graphics is if you take our hours, that's in a 94-hour pay period. That's 94-hour time mark. I'm on salary, and I'm okay with that. Some weekly 80, some weekly 94, some weekly 78, I get one higher. But all of us, decently also salary. I don't feel that I'm overworked. I'm not looking at low specialized. I'm looking to increase. Our staffing model is based on, when you talk about those reports, they don't take me 5 hours, I actually enjoy doing them on because you don't want to.
No, I love it.
Love them.
Because it's a sidebar, when I was asked for an annual report, which we have not produced, that is something that's involved without having nothing yet to say. I could refer back to the December update that I did with the conference, December update, say, it's not exactly what you want, here's what it's going to. So I like it. But what we've got is a very unusual schedule. Every single department I've ever worked for, everyone I know of, has an ABC and sometimes an ABC. Firefighter shift, even our city manager, is a 24-hour shift. And it's never been the case. Stuff you fell about last year. It's just that's how it reflects on me. But that is the standard. Consistent. One thing we'll run into, we've got great volunteers. This is one of the slippery slopes that let's not talk about some of the past together. If you fall down in your shower at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it comes in as a fall, you go to EMS, and it's back up. There is an inclination, the same when you fall, you know, you watch it. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, just before they, I'm not going to that fall. And I looked at today's numbers, in the very serious, the fire department really being a volunteer based department, they're always on, Chief Bell, on the police side, they used to document, they do Pasadena, fire department, you go to the home. It's not, there's not, our system doesn't have the capacity to show you what we do. There were times early on here when I would be out running, the fire call was awful, and that's on the police company. We've gotten really, really good at more with less. Where right now, we have enhanced firefighter. I'm not gonna come back to well. This is on live camera somewhere. I don't have a plan to come back. I'll have one this year. I'll have one next year. It's all set. That's not the case. I will tell you that when I started in 2018, 24% of the time we had a firefighter, one or two here. We guaranteed 24 call. 76% of the time was relying entirely on volunteers. Every volunteer. I think we know what comes. But we've gotten better. Fast forward, let's look at some other stats from 2018. We had, you had one, 76% of the time you had no coverage. 24% of the time you had 2 people on coverage once. First sheet here, this 2018. Our response time back then was 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Let's start there because that's the year I started. Certification, we're not just getting there faster. We're not getting there. We've also come up with certification. Our efficient firefighter sets the standard for firefighters. That's awesome. Big.
honestly, for the last 6 years that I've been here, to a person who talks to me, any resident, the fire department is like our city jewel.
Amen.
It absolutely is. And they don't necessarily know the response time or whatever, but they know that when they call, someone's going to come. And so you had me at hello, because the feedback from the residents is this is a wonderful service, and I think they're willing to pay their property tax dollars
Fire
for
department. I
the
totally-
fire department.
I just think we have to get through
Right.
these audits
hear ya.
before we add any compensation. Sure. Right.
See that?
Cool. Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Jimbo, thank you for actually saying this and having him up.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Anytime you want me to come by, I mean, my door is open and, I know Donnie's take advantage all the time and all this stuff. And I get the fact we need to hire and stuff. Maybe Dalton, he has some things he wants to work through before I just open my mouth to him. Obviously, right. But I'm happy anytime that we're talking about this.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's the thing, and this really is something that all of us, fire department, we all talk collaboratively. And I've got, you don't know, I've got a team of about 5 So I've already plotted out when we're gonna place stuff and all that stuff. I know we've got some years to go between now and Thursday to get budget ready for where to place stuff. I know we have some years, we've got bids going out. So I tell you, this is a good time to put the first. I'm not just throwing a dart at Don, I'm telling you, this is the time to budget your
Thank you, Terry.
Great, great.
And I just want you to know if I fall in the shower, I'm not calling you.
I just cite this as an example because even when I was on the fire truck or EMS, you get that call like, oh my God, please not that call. But right now we've been able to, like today we had a heat-related emergency just a couple hours before this. We had our volunteers come in for training night. That person was treated and all that stuff before EMS got there. Yesterday we had the same thing. And we went in with the battalion, or the squad, from their work site to the fire station. Did active coolant, started an IV. They had 500 milliliters of fluid on board before EMS were got there. Heat ramps are going, all that stuff. We were able to do that because we have skilled trained staff.
Paramedics, yeah.
Right,
I
great.
want to keep that 5-minute thing. Really, the NFPA standard is 5 minutes 30 seconds. We're below that, which is a good thing. I want to keep that going for you guys because we really don't want to keep 5 minutes. And on the back side of this, the last thing I'll say is, administratively, just come by and swing by. I know like Monday we're going down and talking to the county. We get access to stuff all the time. A lot of things. I know when Chief talks about his position, it is honestly it is probably going to be more weighted towards PD. That's what he's doing right now. And it free us up to do some stuff on the fire side. Absolutely. So you have buy-in on the fire side. Yeah, I mean I'm not going to put my firefighter in that position in the same range because they're really.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, one good thing about having you guys here is you can see the whole packet. You can see our revenues, you can see where we're getting our money, and you can see where it's going, so that you're not just looking at your department, but looking at the whole city, which I love the fact that you guys are so
I'll
involved.
tell you one quick story, just kind of humorous story. A good friend of mine is fire chief down in St. Martin. He was talking about going through council, and he was asking for 11 firefighters several years ago. He comes in, animal control wants a dog psychologist. He's like,
Once a what?
Dog psychologist?
dog psychologist. He goes, he's like, that's like $96,000 a year that they don't need. I'm going to deny it. I'm going to my 11 firefighters. Then the dog folks got to talk. Found out that because they have volunteers working at the kennel that are like on probation and stuff, like care, not this. You want to get your dog? There you go. That's your dog. Going through cycling dogs, and that dog's back was astronomical. Every time they had to be retested, all the shots, all that stuff. So the cost of Steve's extraordinary. When they looked at what that position was doing, cost cutting, Les Stevens, the fire chief, was like, I'll give up some money. positions, Brett, actually. So I do. I look at the budget as a whole. I talk to the department heads. I look
Yeah.
through the whole thing. I read Esther's background. I read your beautifully presented packet online. So I know there's a lot of moving parts. I know you'll have to be responsible for the budget.
It's hard, man. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to piggyback on, and I said it, kind of when I asked for these guys to do present to us, is what you were talking about. It's a good thing not only to have them here, but she brought up something that I don't think the normal folk, and me being one of them, I never considered that. So when he talked about the engines breaking down the other day, or a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I was actually on engine 61 when it broke down coming across the dam.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and the interesting thing with that is as we were sitting on the side of the road, waiting for the recovery, the things that I started thinking about, both as, a member of the department and then as a citizen, it was like, okay, so we're sitting here right now with a 45,000 pound paperweight. Who's covering the city? Because there's 3 of us on this engine that are coming back. So who's in the city? And then it became apparent to me, the one thing he's talking about with having the difference, for me, the big difference between a paid person and a volunteer is the responsibility aspect. Because when we broke down, I was the officer on the engine, so what did I do? I picked up my phone and I called Chief Sibley. And then I called Taryn. I was like, what do you want me to do? Because, yeah, we have decision-making authority when we're on the fire. But when it comes to, spending city money and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a good point, yeah.
So those are just some things that, again, I wanted them to present, because they're things that I hadn't thought about until thrown in that position, so. Really not.
Now, you have your own fire truck.
Chief, please.
Yeah, so just to point out, the last thing Taryn said he was gonna say was like 5 or 6 things ago. So,
And we know that.
yeah, so this is gonna be the first thing I'm gonna talk about, not the last. So let me just start out by saying, first of all, you give me your credit card, first of all, or your checkbook, I'm gonna spend all your money, right? I can spend a lot of money, but that's not what I'm here to do. So just like you guys sitting up there, you're elected, I'm appointed to run a department on behalf of the citizens and yourself, you're all citizens. So with that in mind, I'm in the same boat that you guys are in gals. I have to account for everything that I spend. And I have to do it fiscally. I mean, again, you give me your checkbook and you say, here, I've got $1 million in it, go spend it. I want to go spend $1 million. Because there's things that we want. Do there are things that we need? No, not whatsoever, right? But they're cool and we want them, right? So let me just also segue into, I would love to be able to run a hybrid department like Taryn does. Taryn does a fantastic job with the amount of money and the staffing that y'all give him and the equipment that he's able to get, not only through y'all, but through other various sources as grants and whatnot. The fact is that the law enforcement breed is completely different. So I can't have a volunteer come in and do things. And I would love to, because I mean, as Dorothy behind me would say, we have volunteerism is the heart of the city. And so I would love to have that, but I can't. CJIS requirements, TLETS requirements, TCOL, you have a whole bunch of overhead that doesn't allow me to do that. So my thing is full-time employees and part-time employees. And then reserve officers, but again, those are people that have gone through the academy, and they're not administrative positions or whatnot. So I come to y'all asking, or I came to Dalton now vicariously to y'all, asking for a joint position for our Department of Public Safety for an office manager. The thing about that is hard to grasp or kind of put into it is the day-to-day operations of a police chief. So let me just start out by saying my job description says 10% of my time is supposed to be devoted to patrol. That has not happened. And the reason why is because I'm tasked with things like budget, things with making sure staffing models are done. And then, of course, we have the largest record-keeping department in the city, or the largest record-producing department in the city, so to say, outside of water bills and not to say Catrice. But you know, every day my officers go out there, that's documents that are being, every time they do something, that's a case. And that case, somebody wants it. And generally, it's not just one person who wants that case. So within the last 2 weeks, you know, there's things that now really people don't understand is the PIA, Public Information Act, or the Freedom of Information Act, however you want to call it, open records is what we call it. Open records has a 10 business day turnaround from the time you get it. So we have been having a steadily increase on open records requests because, again, everything we do, somebody has a vested interest in it, whether it be the victim, the suspect, witnesses, citizens in general, or just people that have just no better thing to do than do Freedom of Information Act requests because they're First Amendment auditors. We run into that as well. That duty really falls on me. Really, other cities, for example, have their attorney do it and things like that. And I'm not trying to bash any one member of our city whatsoever because we all work together. We're all hired to do a job, and that's not what we're here to do, is to bash each other. We're here to support each other and make it work. But I have to take on that responsibility. So I have to drop everything that I'm doing for that time and devote the attention to gathering those records. Also have to go through laws that are mandatory exceptions. We agree, just regular exceptions that aren't mandatory, that we want to exclude the data because, again, we don't want, as much as we want transparency in our government, some things you just don't want out there that if you filed a police report, you don't want Joe Smith from Temple to have. So we generally try and keep as much as we can in the house. But there are laws to that. There's time consuming. You have to type briefs. I have to liaise with Ophelia to get the information to the requesters. And then sometimes I have to type a brief within 10 days to the Attorney General's office and request that they withhold this exemption and gather all of this. Most recently, we've had a request for a personnel file for a former employee. I don't know what that employee done, you know, somewhere else, but somebody, an investigative reporter, wanted his personnel file. So there are things in there that you know, you don't, as an employee, or don't want people to have. And then there's things that they're entitled to, and we want to make sure that they get what they're entitled to, and we withhold the things that that shouldn't be released. And that's a time-consuming job. In the last week, I got hit with 2 of those. And again, 10-day turnaround time for that. So I have to stop everything I'm doing, which is preparing council reports, preparing budgets, working with vendors to increase our stuff, working on grants, things like that I have to just stop and stop whatever I'm doing and devote that time to that. Because again, if you don't get it done that 10 days, it opens everything up for everything. It's all discoverable. And I'm not going to do that to any one of my employees or a victim or even a suspect or a witness to that. So that responsibility is tremendous. That's just one of the things that I have to stop and do. So most recently, I also had a citizen that wanted to come in and complain. And it wasn't really a complaint against an officer. It was just kind of a complaint in general. It took 2 hours to the exact minute that she was in my office while I was working on budget trying to make some changes and whatnot and getting some numbers, that I had to stop and devote 2 hours to the lady. Again, that's something that, you know, is my responsibility as the chief police. But when somebody walks in the front door, I have to naturally drop everything. Other than that, I have to put that person off. So either way, something is having to give. I'm only a single person and can't do, you know, several things at one time. I mean, you can, but you can't multitask that. So we have had, that happens on a daily basis. Somebody walks into our police department and wants to talk to somebody in the chain of command. Sergeant Hodge, who was here earlier tonight, has to drop everything he has for investigation purposes and you know, transcribing interviews and conducting interviews to meet with people about cases as well. And so we've been doing pretty good with that, trying to, you know, balance that scale of somebody walking in while we're stopping that. But it's getting more and more prevalent, and we're asking for help because not only to that, like I said, we're the largest record producer, you know, I'd say within the city. So those records have to be archived and those records have to be maintained. These are things that in the past have been, let's put them in a folder and let's take them down to the maintenance barn. And well, what happens if the maintenance barn catches on fire? Now all those records are gone. You know, and so you can't have that. So now we have, thanks to Kerry and the city, we have electronic archiving. But again, that takes time. I can't take it from one system and say, phew, push a button and then go from one to the other. It doesn't work that way in our world. So that takes time for somebody to actually do that. And then if we get, again, a records request, we have to go put hands on it. We have to do things and then go through that. And then we have to package that record up. Now we get expungement requests and all kinds of court orders that maintain us to go back to that record. All of that stuff, gathering up those records and things like that, take time to deliver to the places that they need to be. Sergeant Hodge has taken a hit with some of his duties as well. Sergeant Hodge has not been on the street as much as he can because the investigations are continuing. Every time an officer goes out there, it's not an open and done thing. We would love it to be, but our officers then do as much as they can with their skills and expertise, and then they turn it over to Sergeant Hodge or I. And then that takes, again, that's somebody who wants something done or has to needs something done, and they expect us to get it in their timely manner. But we also have the big umbrella of, well, you want stuff from us, or you want stuff from us, or he wants stuff from us, or the citizens want stuff from us, right? Because that's what we're challenged to do. And it's just becoming more and more less time, and the administrative functions of us, we need some help with it. So looking at the future, like Taryn said, I'm not here to smoke and mirror you as well. So when I come to you and I say, hey, I want one employee, whether that be whatever it be, or I want 2 employees, or I want 2 cars, and I tell you I'm not going to come back next year and ask for things like this, I hold true to that. And Taryn and I work well with each other. In the past, it was a give and take with the fire department, police department. I was like, okay, I want one guy and I want a truck. And it's like, okay, well, we'll let you have your truck this year, and then next year I can get my guy. And it was a battle, and that's not what we're here to do. And I don't think that's what y'all want from us. I mean, we work really well. So our goals for going into this, going into this next fiscal year, and probably into the following fiscal year, are to obtain what's called best practices. And that is for our agencies to be recognized by the state agencies, Texas Police Chiefs Association and the Texas Fire Chiefs Association, to be best practices. So that's saying our policies and procedures and the way that we operate in our departments and throughout the city, because it ties into city policies as well, is best practices, which gives us the ability that if something were to happen or the city gets sued or whatnot, we can say we follow the best practices. Like, there's not much else we can do. We can't plan to be perfect, but we can plan to be the best at what we can do, right? And so that is a tremendous administrative task. You have to submit every single policy electronically, and you have to draft it, and there will be revisions based on your city, of your type and size, and what you don't have or what you do have. And then there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and then there's going to be on-site visits from the I don't want to call them auditors, but inspectors, to see that you're following these policies and procedures and your day-to-day operations, and is that what you're sending to us, you're actually doing. So it's a tremendous to liaise like that. And then there is a person that has to manage that program as well. So with the changing of the legislature and the changing of laws just in general that come through special sessions, you have to have somebody manage that program. So to make sure that, that the program stays up to date and that you're not falling behind on laws. And then in cases, like I said, mental health leave and things like that, that just come out of the blue for like police officers and fire departments, that somebody is managing that. And so we're asking for an office manager to help us assist with that, that implementation of that program. And it's an 18 to 24 month process, roughly, would you say? 18 to 24 month process from the time we start it. And that's fully dedicated to that. I mean, you can get it sooner than that if all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, but let's just face it, we're not perfect. So there's gonna be some back and forth. And so that's an 18 to 24 month process if you have somebody that's fully dedicated to it. And other places, police departments and fire departments, they have that. Their office manager does that, or their administrative assistant does that. Because again, it is something that's going to be like an audit. It's a daily thing, and you're going to get information from the inspectors or from the program, and then you're going to have to make some changes and things like that. And it is, yeah. Yeah, and so with that, the perfect example with that, if I left today, walked out of this door and said, I'm done, if you filed an open records request tomorrow, there will be nobody to fill it. Because of the fact that it's so time consuming, and my staff, if I walked out today, doesn't have the time to do it.
And going back to this best practices thing.
Yeah.
So is this like an accreditation?
Yes,
So it's an accreditation that the police department would get,
yes, yeah.
okay? And then, and I'm just dancing things in my head
Yep.
as you're talking, because, you know, ultimately, I want to help all you guys, you know? I would love to just be like, everybody can have everything.
Right. You get a car. You get a
Yeah, I mean, because that's who I am. So I'm wondering, because you make both of you make very valid statements. I wonder if a part-time employee would work for the office manager, you know, because it sounds like both of you have that need.
Well, you know, here's something else to throw in there, and Camille is our example. But what year did you come? 18? Okay, so Camille was hired in 2018 to be our municipal court clerk. A lot of what you said relates to cases and court and investigations and things like that. I mean, should we take the clerk out of
So-
City Hall and give the clerk to you?
So I see what you're trying. I
I'm
see what you're
trying
trying to do.
to
Right. And the-
Manage the city as a whole, align resources
Yeah.
to the highest priorities of the city.
Yeah.
And we have things going on, and we did hire a new position.
Right.
And
So yes. So
that's
so-
another.
So the thing about you have to separate is the municipal side from the county and state side of things, and it's very hard. So your municipal court side, she's hammered every day with all the tickets that we write, and and we've implemented the processes to help her job pretty good. And some of those processes fail every day, which makes her pick up the phone and call me and go, "I have to put this in myself." You know, so we've done a lot to reduce the burden on her. But I can tell you every day that somebody walks in or somebody has a call, she does that, and she handles it very well. The downside to it is on the county and state level kind of thing is the things that she can't touch, the investigations of that. And then
Another option could be a police trainee, whoever is just qualified to be a policeman, and it's your part-time thing, could be a policeman part-time and be the administrator another time. So throwing out how we leverage,
That's what I'm saying.
So-
yes,
so here's
Re-
the other
rather
thing.
than honestly just hiring a person
Well, hold on.
to
So
sit there and do
real
admin.
quick, I want to cut you off, Chief. So
we kind of were really up high at the high level, and we got to get back up there. And the reason why I say that is, great questions. We appreciate what we're looking at. I think really the core of it is there's a billion different options that we can do. Part-time, I'll be honest, not realistic, because good luck finding somebody with that qualities that has another part-time job that's going to do 2 part-time jobs to fill a full-time role. Because if you're already working 40 hours a week at that level of quality, they're probably going to stay in that full-time position. But again, that's just one option. We could put it out there and see, but typically you're not going to really get the part-time stuff just from what we see historically. Now, again, there's, I think, a multitude of different options, and I think really what that boils down to is the city manager in concert with the directors and the department heads on this is to figure out what that attainable solution is. Now, whether we're ready for that or not, that's kind of up to council, and I think really what it kind of boils down to, and I really like the 6-month assessment or the 8-month assessment, is maybe we reevaluate this. But what I do know from our standpoint, outside of diving into the weeds, outside of really kind of, what-ifing different scenarios to death, the bottom line is these gentlemen here and ladies and gentlemen here, they're not going to request something that they do not feel is needed. The question at that point is, can city council, looking at the big picture and the overall, state of the city, where we're at,
Justify it.
is that justified? And I think that's
With
the bottom
all the
line.
other increases and priorities and
No,
roads and, yeah.
No. I'm not saying one
How
way
much
or
can
another.
we
I'm just
absorb
trying to
in
get us
any
back
one
up.
year?
Yeah, I'm
Right.
just trying to get us back up into the high level
good.
side. And so,
Yeah, yeah.
A couple of comments. One, I think what you're talking about is somebody can be there for a while and know what's going on. Part-time people aren't going to do that.
well, the other thing too,
And you got to be, and I don't mean this derogatorily, but it's got to be somebody that knows what they're doing, gets in the job, works with it, and knows what's going on, because there's a billion tripwires in there that you can screw up and the city gets slammed. So I don't, part-time, I don't think so. But is there some software out there that could help automate all of that would allow the data collection and storage and all of that is already, somebody's developed that will already generate these kinds of reports and take the manual part out of it? But I mean,
and
the bottom line is it's got to be affordable.
The reason you can charge for a PIA is because it is labor intensive.
well, and so the other thing too, and
it's low, by the way.
yeah, and the other thing too, again, taking it onto the citywide level, to the point Councilmember Bishop had said earlier, we are really trying to implement technology to make things more efficient, and so kind of sticking with the high level approach and the city manager perspective and managing the personnel and managing kind of our staffing models. The only thing that I can at least tell you from a factual standpoint is, yes, we've seen increases over the past couple of years since I've been here. And I'm going to stand by it that those increases were needed. I do believe, now again, everything's subjective, right? And everybody's points of views are different. What I do know, and at least the only thing that I can tell y'all, is at least the decisions we're making and some of the realignments and stuff with succession planning, with abolishing positions. Obviously, I'm willing to bring to y'all difficult decisions, challenging decisions. I'm willing to say, look, we need to look at the foresight and the forethought to take positions, give them multiple hats to wear, and ultimately, roll, positions in. So all of these positions that we're talking about, ultimately, we took a full-time municipal court person who was not doing it full-time and able to shift that into a part-time, kind of ancillary duty and responsibility to then prepare them for the future city secretary / executive assistant side. So yes, at that year, we did create 2 positions. We created an executive assistant one, and so we ultimately added a new position that year. But this year, now we've realized the success of that, and so instead of me coming to y'all, we're going to say not conservatively and saying, hey, I want to keep the executive assistant and I want to add this position, I'm willing to pull it away. So I think from the standpoint of, again, very difficult decisions. Only thing we can talk about it from my standpoint and our team's standpoint and then y'all's standpoint and where this kind of correlates is it the right time? And I can't answer that because, of course, what we're going to present to y'all for us is the right time and based off of looking at everything that we're seeing in the future. The question is from the council perspective, is it the right time? And I can't answer that for y'all.
I think we need to consider it in light of all the other decisions.
Oh, I agree. And again, that's where council, that's
Making a
where,
decision
that's where, me and with y'all,
We
that's,
got to keep in mind, we're not a manufacturing facility. We don't produce a product, okay? Just like the school, what do you think their biggest payroll is? It's the teachers, right? Do you get anything back from that? You don't, I mean, you get satisfaction, but you don't they don't come back and give you a product to get back. That's us too. We got fire, we have police, so we sell a service. So obviously, we're gonna have a higher budget for personnel than a manufacturing company will. So we got to keep that in
And no one's
consideration.
comparing it to a manufacturing company.
well,
I
no,
don't think.
but to that
I have
point,
no
Mayor.
idea, yeah.
Well, to that point, Mayor, though, again, it goes back to the very simplistic question of what is our service delivery model that we want to provide, and what is the customer service expectations that our customer service that our residents expect. And
We have to figure out how to sustain or improve. But like,
correct.
Think about, our fire department's amazing, our police department's amazing, right? Our water department's amazing, our marina's great, like all of that stuff, it's about sustainability right now.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100%. And one of the deciding kind of factors on me, because I'll be honest, I mean, between Chief Schutze and Chief Vasquez, I pushed back on the officer manager position hard, like really hard, to the point where ultimately we weren't going to do it. No, we weren't even going to present it as an option. And ultimately what shifted my perspective on that was marina, water, wastewater, maintenance. They ultimately have Catrice and her team that really can provide some of that administrative support, which is why we tied it under the administrative services director type department, because courts falls under there, utility billing falls under there, work orders and other things, all these areas that we're really trying to improve. Hey, Councilmember Allen brought up about our work order system. It sucks, but guess what? In order for us to even get to the point to where we can implement new technology to get it, one, that takes sometimes a year. I mean, I got services right now that are a year and a half in that we're just now starting to get implemented to be more efficient. So yes, I agree. The sustainability component is a huge piece. And with public safety, especially really diving into everything else, that was kind of the one department that we could not facilitate some of more of those, we'll call it the administrative, behind the scenes tasks or responsibilities that the administrative services department is providing. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this. It is some of those tough decisions on this one. Yes, sir.
Last point for me that I've been sitting here thinking about, I hate microphones, by the way, so I'm talking loud. You mentioned sustainability, which is spot on, but I think one of the things that we have yet to address, I just think overall, not just for this topic, is that fabulous G word that everybody hates, and that's growth. So the other departments you mentioned, and not taking away from them, they have a very set footprint. Unfortunately, our marina's not gonna grow. Man, I wish it could. But that is a solid footprint. We have to keep in mind that the footprint of our fire department and our police department, whether we want it to or not, are growing. 100+
Absolutely.
houses coming in.
Yeah, beyond the what we call the service population. So now that being said, and that's an excellent point. I think a common ground in this, and again, Councilmember Bishop, I think you hit the nail on the head on this with reassessing this later on in the year, because one of the things that we really want to talk about, and Councilmember Snyder brought this up about kind of during the council retreat, was staffing. And bringing in a facilitator to kind of discuss staffing, because staffing can't happen in a vacuum. It has to happen on a systemic level. And I think in the council retreat, one of the things that we want to bring into that is, with the facilitator for everything else, is what would a 3, 5, or 10-year, staffing model look like? It's one thing for me to sit here and say, yeah, 35 employees, is stable, but I'm just one person. But if we can then bring somebody else that can help us, look at some of the historicals, look at some of the data, look at some of the, the future, and say, how can we, create a trajectory, that word, there you go. How do we create a path forward to where we understand it? Because really, in all honesty, it may get to a point to where we may be able to go down in staff again. We may be able to fluctuate. Or from a standpoint of like rates, right? We're gonna talk about rates, and I actually got some corners that we can maybe, some shortcuts we're gonna take for the rest of this time to help clean some of this up, because the discussion is great, and I think it's 100% warranted. And so the other thing that I talk about with rates is, we talked about it before. We may have seen a drastic increase in staff and salaries in a very short amount of time. But if we extend that out and we say maybe not it's going up, but if we figure out what service, again, service delivery models and customer service expectations, that's huge. If you have a community that wants communicated with and you don't have the staff to communicate it with, guess what? That's a service delivery model and customer service expectations that you're not meeting. So again, it's at what cost? And I agree. I think getting to a point in the retreat of staffing and really diving into it, I think that would be a critical moment at that point to really dive into that. And I think that would ultimately provide y'all some more assessment.
Can I say one more thing before y'all cut me
Please,
off?
Matt.
We done? And this is my last thing, unlike Terry. Unless you ask me some more questions. So the thing about, was going back to your staffing model for 2018. In 2018, I will tell you that you had a chief of police, you had a lieutenant, and then you had and actually in 2018, you had a chief of police and a lieutenant and a sergeant. So in 2019, you added an officer, but you had 3 administrative personnel there. And the sergeant was more on the street than the sergeant now because you had 2 more additional administrative staff. We have, and through the course of, employee issues or whatnot, I was appointed as a chief of police. And at that time, we lost our lieutenant or sergeant, whichever one you want to call it. We lost an administrative position because, first of all, we were down a person in the department until we hired that person back or to fill that spot, which we didn't do for quite a while. And we did that. We haven't replaced that administrative person. So we've taken on the 3 duties what duties of a third person would do with 2. And now we're starting to see the burden. And so that's the reason why the point of that is bringing that administrative person back. And then, we have goals of, aspirations of increasing our officer level, in the next fiscal years with grants and whatnot, because that's something that when I was appointed, that it was stressed to us that we get grants, and we have been, and like I said, in the precedence of our history of our department. So I want to take that into to note that we lost that administrative person, and we've taken on the third person of that, and now we're starting to see the strains of that, and so that's why the request is here.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Let's go to page 12. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I really appreciate the input from you guys, and I would love to just, go forward with all of this. My one biggest concern is, earlier when we were talking about diminished taxes and what the legislature in Austin is going to do, it could really affect our budget. And so I'm a little leery of adding and going forward, because the city of Morgan's Point, it hasn't grown by 23% like our staff has. And so that's just something that I think we need to keep in mind.
No, absolutely, and that is a great point. And again, I think when you look at the overall big picture, and this is information we're trying to get to y'all, is if we look at it just over the past 2 years, yes, it could have an exponential growth of staff. But again, if you tie it into a multitude of things, whether that was neglect, whether that was not looking, not planning ahead, not planning for the future, and just operating in a vacuum, then yes, that could shift. I will say though, and the only thing I would kind of finish the comment on this one is, use caution on making future decisions on what the state may or may not do, because otherwise you'll never accomplish anything because you have no clue the direction that they're going to go. But
Often,
yes.
Dalton, you use the state as a fear tactic towards us. It's going to do this, so you can't have it both ways, brother.
I mean,
I love you to death,
but,
but you can't have it both
well,
ways.
I mean, you're right, and
It's a risk.
and
It is.
It is a risk that we have to
it is,
Yes.
and it is a viable risk, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't understand the politics. I mean,
No one
as
does.
369, it's going to come back. I guarantee it. They're going to have something. Now, again, it's not about a fear tactic. Yes, it is about planning, but we're now this legislative session is done. So now what we do, and this is what every city should do, and this kind of goes back to, we'll call it the administrative side of things. next year, instead of sitting here just waiting for the 89th legislation to come through, we've now identified areas, fear tactic or not, call them whatever you want.
Sure.
But the reality of it is now we're going to start working with our legislative teams and TML and the risk pool and our legislative affairs groups to now start figuring out how do we mitigate these issues in the future and have a less of an impact. So we're going to now play politics to, again, make sure we take care of our small community. So yes, no, you're right. It's not a fear tactic, but yeah, and there's things that you have to do. But if you go, there's a lot, obviously a lot to it. So
I'm just playing with you, baby.
yeah, no,
I'm being
absolutely.
tired.
Hey, we're on a marathon. We just got halfway through. So all right, no, what I want to do is I really want to dive into capital outlay. So on
So
page.
are we done with the salary discussion? Does that mean we're gonna talk salaries tomorrow, or is that done with the whole compensation? What's the next step?
Y'all tell me.
I mean,
Just as one person on the council, I only have the ability to absorb so much of this because this is outside anything. My budget is whatever Kathy tells me I can spend. And we're talking about all these things. This is big argument.
right, and that's why I think we might need tomorrow to finish up payroll and maybe get into capital.
So here's where I'm right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm big on the individual meetings because if I meet with you individually and each one of you tell me that this position sucks and we don't want it, guess what? I'm not putting in the budget. And then I'm going to save time, effort, and energy. Not to say that discussion, not to say that discussion cannot happen. And it should happen because, again, we want to talk about not just what we're putting in the budget, but the wish list and the likes and everything else. But this is kind of where we're at because right now,
Let me push back on that for
Yeah.
1 second. And that is that, and I've been told by you, I'm only one
it
individual.
seems to be the common trend.
I know, that's okay. I'm just, giving you feedback. But that I individually can't do anything. So if I come to you and say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm impotent. So we have to have the discussion as a group because we have to come to you as a body because you can't do anything.
Correct, but here's
if
the
I
thing
ask you to
though.
do it.
If in those individual discussions, because again, I only met with 3-4 people. So I have 2 people that I don't even know, and technically I still have things that I don't know. But if you bring 5 things that you want to see, Councilmember Snyder and everybody else brings 3, 5, or whatever their wish lists are. What we're doing is we're then taking that information, we can compile some of the discussion points that we had, which then puts a more myopic focus on some of these conversations that we can then pinpoint saying, hey, these were some of the common areas that council had some of the biggest challenges on.
Well,
or
and
some of
then
the biggest,
also, sometimes I have to
let me finish
learn.
real quick though. So some of the biggest questions, so we can talk about all of those and learn. But if I get with all of y'all and every single one of y'all said something about the staffing, the way we're going to present that budget is we may take it out, right? Just to present what it would be without it. And then we're going to talk about and say, hey guys, or council, this is something that all the directors requested and it was talking about a staff position or whatever. We still want that discussion, but if every single one of y'all started off saying y'all didn't want it in the budget, we're not going to present a budget with it. I would rather talk about it without it in the budget, if that makes sense. Because yes, the discussion still needs to happen, but now the question is
But
what?
it probably wouldn't have happened.
It's ourselves too.
Well,
Yes, right,
I'm
right.
not
I
ta- I'm not-
need,
I don't want to hear just,
I don't
right.
disagree. So now the question is now that y'all are talking amongst yourselves, what's next? Since y'all are here together making the decision, what's next on the positions?
that's what I'm asking the group.
Well, it's almost 10 o'clock. I think we come back tomorrow at
I think we
6,
come back
and we-
tomorrow at
And we
6.
power through it a couple more
Correct.
hours, sadly.
That's what, I
I
am
mean-
trying to suggest the next step. Yeah. Is everybody okay with that? Because, I think we want to get through it. And
It's up to y'all. Y'all tell me.
that's what I
We gotta
want.
wait for Dennis to come back if we're gonna motion.
Oh, Dennis is right there.
He's freezing. He's like, I gotta get out of the AC.
I'm hot. We want to switch places? We want to come back tomorrow night and take up where we are.
Yeah, let's look this over tonight.
Well, hold on. So real quick, do we want to go a little bit longer and talk about salaries? Because it sounded like y'all weren't done with salaries.
Pat?
It sounded like y'all wanted to come back tomorrow and talk about positions. I would almost say let's wrap up positions and stuff tonight, and then we can jump into capital tomorrow.
I think we're burnt out, is what I'm hearing, loud and clear. And we've got 4 more hours tomorrow. And so why don't you give us time to stew on
Okay.
presentations that we heard, and you're going over all the numbers with us, and we're not gonna request any more information from Carrie. We've got enough on our plate right here. So I make a motion that we adjourn for tonight and that we come back tomorrow as scheduled at 6 o'clock and to pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
That's up to Dalton.
Yeah, no, we're not gonna have staff be here tomorrow.
Okay.
No, yeah, I mean, of course, let me caveat that, Mayor, real quick. Y'all, this is a public meeting. Y'all absolutely can come if you want to. We cannot restrict y'all from coming to public meetings or not, but y'all are not required to be here from the staff side.
I hear it.
Okay, you got a motion?
Well, before we jump into that, Mr. Mayor, since these individuals are not required to be here tomorrow, more than welcome. Do you guys have anything you would like to add?
Oh, right.
I was gonna ask any of
So,
the other,
Is there anything burning that you want to throw out there for us to consider, so you don't have to be here?
Jesse, BJ, Ronnie?
That's not restricted. You saying you can't be here tomorrow. You certainly can be. Yeah.
So BJ, Jesse?
Do you have anything
Ronnie?
you want to say to us tonight? Okay. Okay,
Dorothy, did you make a motion?
I did make a motion.
okay.
No, there's a second? I second. A second. All in favor?
Aye.
6 o'clock tomorrow? Here.